Chapter 425. Do you regret it? In the endless darkness, a woman's voice suddenly rang softly in Chen-Shi's ears. The woman's voice was gentle and soft, and there seemed to be some sadness and sorrow lingering in it. And it was such a seemingly simple question. In Chen-Shi's ears, it was no less than thunder in the sky. Who's talking? At this moment, Chen-Shi was like a cat with its hair standing on end. His body shook violently, and a ring-shaped true origin light pillar suddenly flew out of his body. The light pillar dispelled the darkness, and also calmed Chen-Shi down a little. Then he focused and held his breath, and began to look around vigilantly. Chen-Shi was very familiar with this mysterious dark space that had imprisoned him for 200 years. Just like the last time he was here, there was nothing in this place. There was no light, no air, no radiation, no magnetic field. There was no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. But the woman's voice just now was so real, as if she was leaning against his ear and whispering softly. For safety reasons, Chen-Shi immediately released his divine sense, and with himself as the center, he carefully explored the darkness. But in this endless darkness, there was not even a speck of dust, let alone a person who could speak? Could it be that I'm hallucinating? Chen-Shi was somewhat uncertain. After all, he had experienced too many strange things, and his brain could no longer react. But just as he was feeling puzzled, the woman's voice rang again. Do you regret it? This time, Chen-Shi finally heard it clearly. He was not hallucinating, and there was really someone leaning against his ear and whispering softly. After confirming that he did not hear wrongly, Chen-Shi's heart suddenly trembled violently, because he had no idea where the voice came from. It felt as if a female ghost was leaning on his back, asking him if he had eaten dinner today, and he turned around to look for her, but he could not see the female ghost. How could Chen-Shi not be surprised? There was actually someone in this world who could approach him silently, and he could not sense the other party's presence at all. How was that possible? After all, no matter how severe his injuries were, he was still at the peak of the divine transformation stage. However, he was unable to detect this woman's aura at all. He couldn't even pinpoint the direction of her voice. Who is it? Are you talking to me? Can you show yourself? Chen-Shi asked her question towards the void. The woman did not answer him. After a while, the woman's voice sounded again. Do you regret it? It was still the same problem. This made Chen-Shi suddenly realize. The woman's tone was exactly the same as the previous 2 times. He felt that she was like a recorder that could only repeat the same sentence over and over again. Regret what? Do you regret it? I don't understand what you mean. Can you be more specific? Do you regret it? F***CK. Do you regret it? Do you regret it? No matter what Chen-Shi said, women would always say the same thing. Therefore, Chen-Shi thought about it seriously. He was a coding farmer, so he was naturally very familiar with mechanical commands. Therefore, Chen-Shi was very suspicious that this woman should be a reflection, left behind by a senior expert. She did not have the ability to think, and could only follow the program settings mechanically. If the woman's question was the username, then Chen-Shi's answer was obviously the password. Only by providing the correct password could he successfully log into the account and proceed with the next step. Therefore, when the woman asked again, Chen-Shi answered decisively, I don't regret it. He originally just wanted to verify his guess. Who would have thought? The moment the words I don't regret it blurted out, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down from the endless dark space. The lightning came extremely quickly. Before Chen-Shi could even react, the lightning had already struck not far in front of him. In front of him was an empty dark void. However, after the lightning struck, it seemed to have struck something and instantly exploded into a large ball of purple flames. The scene in front of him was simply too strange. Chen-Shi subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave, only to find that he could not move his body. At this moment, the ball of purple flames floating in the void slowly drifted toward him. Chen-Shi watched as the flames gradually approached him. He tried his best to break free, but his body seemed to have been separated from his soul, and did not listen to his commands at all. One had to know that he was at the peak of the soul formation stage. At this moment, he was like a puppet that was being manipulated by someone at will. Faced with such a strange situation, Chinchi suddenly had a human emotion that had not appeared in hundreds of years: confusion and helplessness. Confusion and uneasiness. Humans were always afraid of things that they did not know, and Chinchi was no exception. It was also at this moment that he finally realized how insignificant he was. So what if he was at the soul formation stage? The purple flames were getting closer and closer to Chinchi. It was only when they were about to touch him that the purple flames suddenly stopped. Then, under Chinchi's dumbfounded expression, a shackled arm covered in scars suddenly stretched out from the flames. First it was the left hand, then the right hand. Like Sadako crawling out of a TV, the person slowly crawled out of the flames along with the clanking sound of the shackles. Perhaps it was because of the spell, but Chinchi could not see the person's face at all, so he could only judge based on the slender figure and the high bulging chest. The person in front of him should be a woman. The way the woman appeared was very strange, but what really shocked Chinchi was the way the woman was dressed. He saw that her wrists, ankles, neck, waist, abdomen, ribs, and shoulder blades were all locked in shackles. 9 chains thicker than her arms were connected to the shackles, so every time the woman moved, the chains all over her body would jingle nonstop. Her clothes were ragged, and Chinchi could even see half of her chest. And the parts of her body that were not covered by clothes were full of terrifying scars. Chinchi was stunned. The woman's appearance was completely different from what he had imagined. He originally thought that the other party was some hidden expert, at least at the same level as the Taiching divine ancestor, so she could easily bring him here from the Dragon Head Peak. Who would have thought that this woman was dressed like a prisoner? Chinchi stared at the woman in front of him in a daze, and only a blank was left in his mind. And at this moment, the woman who crawled out of the flames directly pressed her blurry face against Chinchi's face, and then asked again, "Are you willing?" Chapter 426. Are you willing? Even though the woman's face was only 2 or 3 centimeters away from Chinchi, he still couldn't see the woman's face clearly. He only felt that his vision was blurry, and he couldn't even distinguish her facial features. It felt like a thick layer of mosaic. Chinchi didn't know what the woman wanted to ask, but he didn't dare to answer. After all, he didn't even know what the woman was asking. What if he answered wrongly? A bank card password would be temporarily frozen if it was entered wrongly 3 times, not to mention this strange and mysterious woman in front of him. Although the woman was close, Chinchi couldn't feel any trace of her existence. There was no body temperature, no breath, no sound, and no smell. Whether it was breath, or aura. This woman had none of that. She was like a lifeless, still painting. As long as Chinchi closed his eyes, he wouldn't be able to sense the woman's existence. But as soon as he opened his eyes, the woman's blurry face would immediately appear in front of him. Are you willing? Just like before, the woman waited for about 2 minutes. After seeing that Chinchi didn't answer, she asked again. Her voice was still so gentle and soft. After Chinchi heard this, the pressure in his heart increased. Should he answer? Or should he not answer? Chinchi was tied to the ground by the woman. Other than his head, his body was completely out of his control. This stalemate obviously wasn't a good idea. So, after Chinchi thought about it again and again, he asked tentatively, "Dare I ask? What's your question?" "There's only one question. Are you willing or not? How can I answer that?" Chinchi originally only wanted to test her, to see if the woman would still ask questions mechanically like before. But he didn't expect that after the woman listened, her head suddenly moved slightly, as if she was looking at him up and down. Seeing this, Chinchi suddenly had a guess in his mind. This woman didn't seem to be a simple reflection. Sure enough, after the woman looked at him up and down, she asked the question, "Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your lover?" "I'm willing." As soon as the woman finished speaking, Chinchi gave the answer decisively. Wasn't this nonsense? If it wasn't for Ying, how could he be easily defeated by 3 heavenly masters? Chinchi could be considered to have walked through the gates of hell. Although he couldn't figure out why he suddenly returned to the dark space, it didn't stop Chinchi from making bold guesses. This must have something to do with this mysterious woman. Since the woman had brought him back from the gates of hell, she probably wasn't just playing with him for fun. Therefore, after much consideration, Chinshi decided to answer the woman's question first. He also wanted to see what strange reaction the woman would have next. However, what Chinshi didn't expect. He gave the answer, but the woman did not respond at all, as if a computer had crashed. Chinshi was depressed. After 2 or 3 minutes, the woman, she slowly raised her right hand and gently placed it on Chinshi's cheek. The arm that was shackled and covered in scars was so real. However, Chinshi didn't feel like he was being touched by a foreign object. This scene was very strange. It was like the sun shining on the arm, and then the shadow of the arm was reflected on Chinshi's face. Chinshi couldn't feel the woman touching him at all. However, his eyes could clearly see that the woman's palm was continuously caressing his face. What's going on? The woman's behavior made Chinshi very uncomfortable. However, there was nothing he could do. He could only watch as he was being molested. He was at the peak of the soul formation stage, but now he was reduced to such a state. It was really sad and lamentable. Since he couldn't resist, he could only endure silently. Chinshi closed his eyes with a numb expression, but his mind was working quickly. Everything in front of him was too strange. Even with his experience, he couldn't figure out what kind of existence this woman was. This scene was very similar to how he treated his sister-in-law in the past. Didn't Qin Xueqing, who was still an ordinary warrior, also let Chinshi do whatever he wanted? The peak strength did not understand the world of the soul formation stage. Just like the soul formation stage did not understand the world of the void realm. Even when facing his master, Chinshi didn't feel so lost. So it was obvious. This mysterious woman in front of him. She might not just be a void realm expert. Thinking of this, Chinshi couldn't help but open his eyes and keep looking at the woman in front of him. He was trying to find a secret from the woman. But at this moment, in the depths of the endless void, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down. The moment the lightning flashed, not only was Chinshi shocked, but even the woman seemed to be shocked. The woman hurriedly turned her head to look, and the chains on her body suddenly made a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. Then, Chinshi's divine sense seemed to have been electrified, and he finally detected a trace of vital essence fluctuation in the depths of the void. This fluctuation was extremely violent, and it could be said to be, the sky fell and the earth cracked. It was earth-shattering. The first bolt of lightning had just disappeared, and it was followed by another bolt of lightning. One bolt after another, and it didn't stop at all. In just a few breaths, there were hundreds and thousands of bolts of lightning striking the depths of the void. The bright light of the lightning was particularly dazzling in the darkness. In each bolt of lightning, there seemed to be a huge wave of vital essence fluctuation. Chinshi had never seen such an exaggerated wave of vital essence fluctuation, and he only felt that he was so small in front of this wave of energy. It was as panicked as an ordinary person facing the brilliant power of heaven. There was a great terror in the depths of the void. It was like a puppy facing a tiger, or a grass snake facing a dragon. The strong pressure brought about by the difference in realm almost made Chinshi breathless. Pressure was a very mysterious thing. Here was an example. When Chinshi faced a group of martial artists on Earth who didn't know anything, as long as he deliberately showed a trace of hostility, the other party would be so scared that they would piss their pants, and probably not even be able to stand properly. This was pressure. This special phenomenon would only occur when there was an absolute difference in realm between two people. It came from the instinct of life, so even immortal cultivators were no exception. Even though Chinshi had stayed in the heavenly jade world for a whole 500 years, he had never seen such a strong pressure. This big shot who suddenly appeared in the depths of the void. Was he just at the insightful void realm? Even if someone said that he was a tribulation true immortal, Chinshi would still believe it. And while Chinshi was struggling to resist the strong pressure, the chains on the woman's body suddenly tightened, and an unknown force was trying to pull her back into the purple flame. The woman tried to struggle, but the 9 chains on her body seemed to be electrified. The more she struggled, the more pain the chains would bring her. Finally, the woman couldn't hold on any longer. But the moment she was about to be pulled back into the purple flame by the chains, the woman suddenly stretched out her right hand, and then pointed at Chinshi's forehead. Chapter 427. In the depths of the void, dazzling lightning flashed one after another. Although there was no sound of thunder, every time the lightning flashed, it would set off a huge wave of vital essence. A strong pressure kept surging from the darkness. Chun-Shi was in the middle of this pressure. He only felt that he was now like a small sampan floating in the sea, and could be crushed into powder by the stormy waves at any time. Chun-Shi struggled against the invisible pressure from the depths of the void. The woman struggled against the 9 chains on her body. There seemed to be an unknown power in the purple flame, and it was this power that restrained the mysterious woman in front of him. The woman struggled frantically, but these 9 chains seemed to be wrapped around the capstan of an ancient city gate. Every time the capstan turned, the chains would tighten inch by inch toward the purple flame. Purple flame, azure lightning. The mysterious woman, 9 chains. Everything looked so strange. But the really strange thing was, no matter how shocking the scene in front of Chun-Shi was, he did not hear any strange sounds. Except for the occasional clanging of the chains, Chun-Shi could not hear any sound. The dark space was still so quiet. Even if the woman seemed to be howling at the sky, Chun-Shi did not hear any sound she made. It was as if he was deaf. Apart from that strong pressure, even his divine sense could not detect any unusual fluctuations. What was happening in front of him? It was completely beyond the scope of Chun-Shi's understanding. The lightning flashed faster and faster, and the purple flame grew stronger and stronger. The woman was gradually unable to hold on. But the moment she was about to be pulled back into the flame, the woman's right index finger suddenly pointed between Chun-Shi's eyebrows. At that moment, Chun-Shi suddenly felt a bone-piercing chill. It was as if his eyebrows had suddenly touched a piece of ice. It was so cold that he could not help but shiver. Then, Chun-Shi did not even have time to react. The past events of his life rushed to his mind like a tide, and appeared in front of him one by one. It was like a movie that started rewinding at 32 times the speed of the movie when the ending was clearly shown. From Longsho Peak to Diyu Island, from Shangjing to Zhonghai, from Tianxian to Earth. Chun-Shi also reverted from Soul Formation to Yuanying, then to Golden Core and Foundation Establishment, and finally back to being an ordinary person. The timeline was reversed, and the past was still vivid in his mind. Chun-Shi was like a spectator sitting in front of the TV, watching his life in a daze. Soon the movie returned to the beginning. It was the scene when he worked overtime until late at night and couldn't get a taxi, so he could only run home in the rain. A bolt of lightning struck down, the image stopped abruptly. "It's you." He turned around and looked at her with a gentle gaze. However, in the blink of an eye, his thoughts had already turned 1,000 times. Chun-Shi gaped at the mysterious woman in front of him. He had thousands of questions in his heart, but before he could ask, the woman was dragged back into the flames by the chains. And the moment the woman entered the flames, she seemed to have heard Chun-Shi's voice, so a faint smile appeared on her originally pained face. Although Chun-Shi couldn't see the woman's face, he could clearly feel that the woman seemed to be smiling at him. Finally, the woman's figure was swallowed by the purple flames. The lightning in the distance disappeared in a flash. After the purple flames fluttered for a moment, they instantly disappeared like fireworks. And as the flames went out, the pressure that came from the depths of the void also slowly faded. Chun-Shi was like a spectator, staring blankly as the darkness enveloped him again. Everything returned to silence. He could finally move again. Huff, huff, huff. As soon as he was free, Chun-Shi couldn't help but start to pant heavily. Although the strong pressure had disappeared, he still hadn't recovered from the fear. Chun-Shi forced himself to calm down a little, then sat cross-legged in the void. And at this moment, Chun-Shi suddenly realized that his injuries had healed, and the true origin in his body was abundant, almost at the peak. What was going on? Could it be that the woman cured him before she left? Thinking of this, Chun-Shi couldn't help but be shocked, and he suddenly had an illusion that he was trapped in a deadly illusion. Illusion attacks the heart, and attacking the heart was the most important thing. There was nothing in the dark space, so naturally there was no reference. After Chun-Shi's strength recovered, everything seemed to return to the moment when he opened the gate of heaven with his sword and fell into the dark space. So he couldn't help but wonder if he had fallen into some kind of illusion again. Everything that he had experienced before Was it all just an illusion? This guess was actually very reasonable. After all, illusion arrays were usually more terrifying than killing arrays. However, Chunshi immediately rejected this guess. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The pressure was so real, and the woman's existence was so real. No illusion could be so realistic, so everything that he had experienced just now was definitely real. Chunshi had encountered the insightful void before, because his master was at the insightful void. And Chunshi had been lucky enough to see the Tao integration above the insightful void. However, even a Tao integration stage senior wouldn't be able to exert such terrifying pressure on him. So the great terror that was emitting such a strong pressure in the depths of the void was definitely not at the insightful void stage, and might even surpass the Tao integration and reach the legendary tribulation bath. Immortal cultivation, immortal cultivation. This was the real, immortal. Chunshi didn't sense any aura from the woman. But just based on the 9 chains on her body and the move she showed before she left, Chunshi had reason to believe that this woman should be at the same level as that great terror. Moreover, this mysterious woman seemed to have an inexplicable kindness toward him. Coupled with her last finger, Chunshi instantly had a guess in his heart. Could it be the reason why he went to the heavenly jade world for no reason? Everything was because of this mysterious woman just now. Chunshi's heart was filled with questions. But no matter how hard he racked his brains, he still couldn't figure out the reason. There were still too few clues. One had to know that this was an important figure that only existed in myths and legends, and he was lucky enough to come into close contact with her today. Although he only said a few words, he resisted a strong pressure. But for Chunshi, who was already at the soul formation stage, this kind of experience was very rare. So he immediately sat cross-legged in the void and began to carefully recall the entire process of the woman's appearance. He tried to gain some experience from it, but he didn't expect that when he sat down for a whole 300 years. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 428. In the Dark Space. Chunshi used a strand of true essence to create a very crude timer, and then he completely went into seclusion. After his previous experience, he didn't dare to waste his true essence at all. Instead, he entered the state of tortoise rest from the beginning, and kept thinking about everything he just saw in his mind. The reason why the woman didn't have any aura on her was that she had an inexplicable kindness toward Chunshi from the beginning, so she deliberately restrained her aura. If the woman was a prisoner, then the great terror that appeared later was obviously the prison guard guarding the prisoner. These were 2 great figures who had the ability to reach the heavens and penetrate the earth. Chunshi couldn't figure it out, so he focused all his energy on himself. And what he just experienced also made Chunshi realize for the first time that soul formation was too weak. So weak that even if he came to heaven capital, he couldn't get the soul mirror and save Ying. He was so weak that he could only tremble and be at a loss under the terrifying pressure of others. Chunshi really didn't like this feeling. So he wanted to use this opportunity to get close to the 2 great figures to break through to the insightful emptiness realm in one go. Strength was always relative. In the heavenly jade world, he was the Dawn Divine Lord who oversaw a region. On earth he was a god, who was above ordinary people. But in heaven capital, he found that he couldn't deal with the siege of the 10 celestial venerables and 5 divine generals by himself. As for the great terror of the mysterious woman, she was a terrifying existence that Chunshi didn't even dare to think about before. The comfortable life made Chunshi gradually forget the first rule, which was natural selection, survival of the fittest. Chunshi had a monthly salary of more than 10,000, and his life in a small county was too comfortable. But for big cities like Shangjing and Zhonghai, what was more than 10,000 a month? To put it bluntly, in fact he had lowered his own level, which was why he was able to live a carefree life. You have your pursuits and I have my choices. So Chunshi's previous idea wasn't wrong. His mistake was, the development and progress of society would not stop because of a single person. Following the birth of a child, the price of housing skyrocketed. Even if they were hiding in a small county town with a monthly income of more than 10,000, They began to struggle to make ends meet. When Chun-Shi could no longer protect his family with his current strength, that would be when he made a grave mistake. Chun-Shi realized his mistake, which was why he was so eager to break through to the insightful emptiness realm. It was the same as when he was eager to break through to the divine transformation realm and step on the path home. Fortunately, as long as a man was willing to work hard, it was never too late. Rin Jingfei founded Huawei at the age of 43. Zhong Qingho founded Waha at the age of 44. Then there was Colonel Sanders of the United States, who didn't even start KFC until he was 66. I was once dressed in fine clothes and riding a horse, young and frivolous. Now he's working diligently, and a great talent is a late success. While Chun-Shi was trying his best to comprehend the true meaning of the word void in the dark space, the little fellow was also gradually adapting to her new life, without the company of her parents. As usual, the little fellow made many video calls to Chun-Shi every day. For this reason, Wu Lian even specially invited a child psychologist from the Capital University to deal with the little fellow's overflowing yearning at any time. The little fellow was like Truman in the movie The Truman Show, living in a fairy tale world that Wu Lian carefully created for her. She gradually got used to video calls with her father, and also gradually got used to her mother's deep sleep. But unfortunately, communication through video calls couldn't compare to the company of real people after all. When the child no longer cried and insisted that her father come home, it meant that her heart had begun to close up. As soon as the video call ended, the smile on the little fellow's face would visibly diminish. She no longer liked new toys, and she no longer clamored to play in the ice rink. If the two brothers didn't come to the courtyard to play with her every day, rain or shine, her entire childhood would probably be much dimmer. Toys, cartoons, Big Cat, and the two brothers had already formed the entire content of the little fellow's life. Grandpa was very good to her. Although Grandpa was often in a daze alone and accidentally neglected her existence, the little fellow could still feel Grandpa's deep care for her in her heart. But this care, it was more like the feeling that Aunt Zhang once gave her, rather than the feeling that her parents once gave her. Only when one once had something would one know what it meant to lose it. She began to like holding her phone in a daze in the room alone. Because she grew up, she naturally began to have troubles. Time flew by. It was a new year. Aunt Zhang was very puzzled as to why Chun-Shi didn't call her this year. So as soon as the spring festival was over, the old lady took the initiative to call Chun-Shi. Unexpectedly, the old lady was fooled by Wang Chuanju, saying that Chun-Shi and his family were traveling abroad and wouldn't be back for a long time. Aunt Zhang naturally believed this, so after a series of instructions on the phone, she completely dispelled the idea of visiting the little fellow in Beijing. Even a snail would leave a white mark when it crawled past, let alone a person. Chun-Shi's sudden disappearance also completely shattered the network of contacts he had built before. Of course, for him, this kind of network was actually dispensable. But for Nian, a child who grew up relying on her parents' network, all of this was indeed a little too cruel. In the blink of an eye, spring passed and summer arrived. Nian was also 6 years old. Perhaps because of his age, Qin Yongyan usually didn't care about any holidays except for the spring festival. If the little fellow hadn't suddenly asked when she came home from school, Qin Yongyan would have even forgotten that he had to celebrate a child's birthday. May 5th. Wasn't today Nianyan's birthday? After looking at the calendar, Qin Yongyan slapped his forehead and realized. After comforting the little fellow for a while, he hurriedly rushed out to buy her a cake. To be honest, although Qin Yongyan had a scholarly, easygoing and otherworldly temperament, he was actually a straight man of steel. A straight man. Usually he only knew how to practice martial arts. But now he suddenly wanted him to make the child happy. Wasn't this making things difficult for him? If the little girl in the cake shop didn't kindly remind him, Qin Yongyan wouldn't even know to prepare 6 candles for Nian. Fortunately, Nian's temperament had changed. If it was when Chun-Shi was still alive, this little thing would immediately cry out of grievance. Nian didn't cry. After seeing her grandfather lighting the candles in a hurry, she followed what her mother taught her before, closed her eyes and seriously made a wish. Her wish was very simple. That was she hoped that her father could come back soon. Therefore, after simply eating a few mouthfuls of cake, the little fellow let Qin Yongyan accompany her to sing Insects Fly, just like how she used to celebrate her birthday. The dark sky was low, followed by the bright stars. Insects fly, who are you thinking of? The stars in the sky shed tears, the roses on the ground withered. The cold wind blows, as long as you accompany me. Chapter 429. Nian was 6 years old. Without the company of her parents, the boring time seemed to pass faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, the little girl had already graduated from Donghuimen kindergarten. It was time for her to go to primary school. August 30th, reporting day. Early in the morning, after Qin Yongyan helped the little girl wash up, the two of them got on the bus, and then went to the primary school affiliated to Capital University, located near Zuanwoman. This was the growth path that Qinshi had planned for the little girl a long time ago. Therefore, after Nian graduated from Donghuimen kindergarten, she didn't even have to go for an interview. She directly got a place to enroll in Capital University affiliated primary school. And because of her, the two brothers naturally easily got two very precious places. Because they had been living with Xia Kaiji recently, the two brothers couldn't report with Nian today. They could only arrange to meet her at the reporting office later. Qin Yongyan originally thought that Nian would inevitably feel a little scared, and even unwilling to go to school when she suddenly changed to an unfamiliar environment. Therefore, before they left, Qin Yongyan was actually mentally prepared for a tough battle. But what he never expected was, after Nian walked into this unfamiliar school, her face didn't have the usual fear and uneasiness that was commonly seen on other children. Instead, it was like she was touring a park. While she walked slowly to the reporting office, her eyes were constantly looking at the classmates who passed by her. To be honest, with her calm appearance, she didn't look like a first-grade child who had just entered school at all. Instead, she looked more like a 4- or 5th-grade child. As one of the top experimental primary schools in the country, the Capital Affiliated Primary School was not a private school. Therefore, the moment one entered the school, it gave off a feeling of simple elegance with green bricks and gray tiles. There was also a quiet, beautiful, scholarly, and rich cultural atmosphere. This extremely scholarly atmosphere naturally formed a sharp contrast with the childlike atmosphere of the kindergarten. In addition, there was also a fundamental difference between primary school and kindergarten. After all, kindergarten was mainly for the experience of life, while primary school was where the real learning began, such as the timetable, work and rest schedule, exam results, homework, and other nightmarish things would also haunt them from this moment on until they became adults. And it was also from today onwards that Nian had a new identity, namely students. Yes, primary school students. Nian was assigned to Year 1 Class 2. This class assignment method was randomly assigned by the computer, so after the little fellow sat in the classroom, she waited for a long time but did not see the brothers. Qin Yongyan asked the teacher, and found out that the two brothers had been assigned to Year 1 Class 3 next door. It was a sad story. Qin Yongyan was worried that the little girl would be scared, so he quickly comforted her and promised that he would find a way to put her in the same class as the two brothers. Who would have thought that the little fellow only nodded blankly after hearing this, and did not show any extreme reaction. On the other hand, the two brothers in the next class were so anxious that they were about to cry because they couldn't find Nian. The first graders had just graduated from kindergarten, so they more or less carried the habits they had developed in kindergarten. Therefore, the classroom gradually quieted down after the homeroom teacher and the subject teacher arrived. The homeroom teacher first did a simple self-introduction, then began to distribute various kinds of information collection forms to the parents. This was the first time parents and teachers met. The first graders couldn't sit still, so the whole process didn't take very long. After the homeroom teacher took back the forms, she asked the parents to follow her to the multimedia classroom, where the school would officially hold a parent conference for the first graders. During this time, the children in each class had to stay in the classroom and be led by the teacher to play games with them. After the parent conference ended, the children would be familiar with the school environment, and the new students' registration would be completed successfully. They only had to wait for school to officially start the day after tomorrow. There were no problems with the school's arrangements. However, after Qin Yongyan followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, there was a small commotion in Year 1 Class 2. As for the reason for the commotion, it was completely because of an unlucky brat. After the parents followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, the children were guided by the teacher to play with plasticine. Nianyan was wearing a white dress today. Qin Ruoying personally picked it for her. With her rosy cheeks and big watery eyes, she looked very stunning. Yes, just like her mother back then. With such an outstanding appearance and a faint fragrance on her body, the boys in the class would peek at her from time to time from the moment she walked into the classroom. Children at this age still had a vague understanding of gender, and it was more out of curiosity. Beauty was innate because it was determined by genes. Most children would enter the aesthetic sensitivity stage when they were 3 years old. They would even choose colors that they liked, such as red, blue, etc. Therefore, don't think that children couldn't distinguish between beauty and ugliness. Not only did adults like beautiful women, but children also liked beautiful women. Nianyan was clearly a living beauty. Most children were very obedient, but there were always a few exceptions, which was commonly known as brats. Unfortunately, there was a brat sitting diagonally behind Nianyan. Although this brat was only 6 years old this year, he was very mischievous. He was not afraid of parents or teachers at all. It seemed that when he was in kindergarten, he was the tyrant of the class. Nianyan was so cute, so the brat naturally had his eyes on her from the beginning. Of course, this brat's heart was not as dirty and dark as the adults. He just instinctively wanted to get close to Nianyan. However, the way he approached others was completely unacceptable to ordinary people. This brat took advantage of the time when the teacher was teaching the other children to play with plasticine to climb to the ground and quietly crawl behind Nianyan. He wanted to lift Nianyan's skirt, just like he used to lift other people's skirts. However, just as he held the little girl's skirt tightly with a smirk on his face, the little girl who was seriously playing with the plasticine seemed to have been prepared. She suddenly stood up from her seat and slapped him directly in the face. Slap. Nianyan did not use much strength, but the crisp sound of the slap alarmed the entire classroom. The brat was stunned. He was stunned for a long time. When he saw the teacher rush over, the brat's grievance seemed to have found an outlet. He couldn't help but burst into tears. Chen Yan, what are you doing? Chapter 430. Chen Yan. Compared to the recently popular names like Zishuan, Sini, Sahan, and Kursin, the little girl's name seemed particularly ordinary. But because of her outstanding appearance, the teacher remembered this child who was as cute as a porcelain doll at a glance. She didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but most people would discover a strange phenomenon during their school days, and that was, a good-looking girl would usually be the class monitor of the class. Of course, the prerequisite was that the girl had self-respect and self-respect. Perhaps it was because their beautiful appearance gave them more attention, but at the same time, it also gave them more pressure. In addition, girls matured early, so these girls were usually more mature and sensible than ordinary children. Nianyan's appearance was already very outstanding, and in addition, she was influenced by rich spirit energy all year round. So even if she didn't cultivate, she had a temperament that was far superior to other children her age. Therefore, the moment the teacher saw her, she had already listed the little girl as a candidate for class monitor. If her performance in the future was good, and her results could keep up with the rest of the team, this position would obviously be decided internally. But no one would have thought that the little girl who easily gained the approval of all the teachers would beat another child to tears on the first day of school. The naughty child sat on the ground and cried loudly, while Nianyan stood there and looked at him coldly. Seeing this, the teacher couldn't help but be angry, so she couldn't help but scold her. However, Nianyan didn't defend herself. Instead, she pursed her lips and looked indifferent. School bullying was a situation that occurred in every school, and even every class. As one of the top teachers in the country, the teachers of the capital-affiliated primary school naturally did a lot of research in this area. The naughty child deliberately cried loudly, hoping that the teacher would be biased towards him. Fortunately, the teacher wasn't a fool, so before confirming the truth, she didn't dare to make a conclusion. Seeing that Nian didn't continue to beat him, the teacher came between the two children and patiently asked the reason. In fact, when the teacher realized that the naughty child wasn't in his seat, she had a guess in her heart. So she immediately relaxed her expression and tried to communicate with the little girl. Chen Yan, tell me, why did you bully your classmate? Hearing this, the little girl pouted and replied stiffly, Daddy said that no one is allowed to lift my skirt. I'm a girl, whoever lifts my skirt is a pervert. Dad said that this is a matter of principle, so I must give him a good thrashing. The little fellow's words were loud and clear, full of righteousness. After hearing this, the teacher didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was right, but how old was this child? How would she know anything about erotic things? It was probably just for fun. Teacher understood the entire process of what had happened. In such a situation, it was wrong to favor either side. The naughty brat had sneakily come over to lift her skirt, but he didn't expect that this time he would lift a steel plate, so she raised her hand and gave him a slap. It was wrong to lift her skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit her. Therefore, after the teacher pointed out the two children's mistakes, she asked them to apologize to each other. Chen Nian, if you encounter such a situation in the future, you can tell teacher directly. Teacher will definitely criticize him severely. But you have to remember, you're not allowed to hit anyone in the future, understand? The teacher felt that the nature of hitting someone was worse, so she asked Nian to apologize to the naughty brat first. Unexpectedly, after Nian heard this, she immediately frowned and replied stubbornly, I won't. He's a pervert. I don't want to apologize to a pervert. Perhaps it was because the movie Su Yuan had left a very serious psychological shadow on Qin Shi, so he had always been very concerned about the issue of indecency. Actually, to put it more bluntly, the naughty brat's behavior was indecent. Age wasn't a reason to make a mistake, nor was it an excuse to avoid making a mistake. Scourges were cultivated slowly. If a mistake was made and a random excuse was found to cover it up, there would obviously be more girls who would be unlucky in the future. Why did you not teach your child well? But my child was the one who was hurt. This was a matter of principle. Therefore, Qin Shi's attitude had always been absolutely unforgivable, absolutely unforgiving. Nian had obviously inherited Qin Shi's teachings. Therefore, when she heard that the teacher actually asked her to apologize to the naughty brat, Nian suddenly became confused. Pervert. Shameless. I'm not going to apologize to a pervert. Bah. The little girl's reaction was somewhat out of the teacher's expectations. She called him a pervert here and there, and the last bah deeply hurt the naughty brat who was lying on the ground pretending to be innocent. This was great. Seeing that the whole class was watching the show, the naughty brat who had to bear the name of pervert suddenly felt a little embarrassed. After all, he was still a child. The teacher was busy correcting Nian's mistake, so she didn't notice the naughty brat's thoughts. When the naughty brat saw that everyone seemed to be laughing at him, his mentality instantly exploded. After a loud cry, he ran out of the classroom while crying. Well, this time he was really crying. Seeing this, the teacher quickly chased after him. But this naughty brat ran like a thief, and in a flash he jumped into the multimedia classroom next door. The parents were having a meeting in the multimedia classroom, and this tragic cry immediately attracted everyone's attention. While everyone was still wondering what was going on outside, a rather good-looking young woman directly rushed out of the classroom. Nonsense, as a mother, how could she not know whose child was crying? As expected, as soon as the beautiful young woman went out, she saw the naughty brat who was covering his face and running wildly. Yang. Come here, mommy is here. What's wrong? Who bullied you? Don't cry, tell mommy will help you. After seeing his mother, not only did the naughty brat not stop crying, but he also cried even more heartbreakingly. The naughty brat's cries echoed in the corridor classroom. As one could imagine, how wronged he must have been. Fortunately, the school didn't officially start today, and in such a big school, there were only freshmen like them, or else where would the school put its face? The parent-teacher conference was forced to be suspended. The principal walked out of the multimedia classroom with a gloomy face. A group of head teachers and head teachers followed behind the principal expressionlessly, but in their hearts, they had already started cursing. Which class was this child from? Was the teacher who took care of this child an idiot? Didn't he know that today was the registration day? The principal had just introduced the school's teaching staff and teaching atmosphere to the parents, but in the end, the other side slapped their faces. The head teachers of each class silently prayed in their hearts, only hoping that this unlucky child was not from their class. The principal, teachers, parents. A group of people walked out of the multimedia classroom in such a grandiose manner. When the head teacher of Year 1 Class 2 realized that this naughty brat was actually from Year 1 Class 2, she fell silent. The head teachers of the other classes suddenly had a very strange expression on their faces. Hee, there was a good show to watch. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com. Wonderful Book Mobile Version Website. .com. Chapter 431. The naughty child cried until the sky darkened. No matter what the parents asked him, he just pointed at the classroom and kept sobbing. Looking at his pitiful appearance, those who didn't know would think that he had been wronged. It was normal for first graders to cry. It shouldn't have caused such a big commotion. Unfortunately, the child's mother wasn't someone to be trifled with. The teacher who rushed out tried to calm the situation, but the beautiful young woman didn't listen to her at all. Seeing that the child couldn't stop crying, the young woman took her son directly to the door of the multimedia classroom. Then, she squatted at the door and slowly coaxed her son. From the beginning to the end, she didn't say a word to the teacher. Instead, she silently comforted her son. And this was actually the highest level of a shrew. She didn't make a fuss, she didn't hang herself, she just looked on coldly and laughed. She didn't even do anything hysterical or embarrassing. She just silently stood at the door with the child. At that moment, all the teachers present, including the principal, couldn't help but feel a little scared. They instantly understood that today's matter might not be easy to resolve. The naughty child's crying interrupted the meeting, and at the same time, it caused a burst of discussion among the parents. The young woman didn't do anything extreme, and the school couldn't forcibly take the crying child away. Therefore, seeing that the head of the year department couldn't communicate with her, the principal could only temporarily stop the meeting. He personally promised the young woman that he would give her a satisfactory explanation after he found out the reason. After the young woman heard the principal's promise, she whispered a few words in the naughty child's ear. It was strange. The naughty child who couldn't be coaxed heard his mother's words, and his originally tragic cries suddenly became sobbing. Is this an Oscar-winning actor? Seeing this, the teachers couldn't help but silently complain in their hearts. Everyone was an adult, so how could they not understand the twists and turns in the story? This woman knew how to use the rules. And at the same time, she understood the principle of the weak defeating the strong. It was obvious how angry the principal was to be involved in such a mess on the first day of school. Therefore, after the principal gave the task of presiding over the meeting to the head of the year department, he quickly walked out of the multimedia classroom with the class teachers. When the parents saw this, they ignored the age director's advice and hurriedly followed the principal out of the multimedia classroom. After confirming that the troublemaker wasn't their child, the parents returned to their seats and discussed the aftermath of the incident. It's so hard to get a place in the capital-affiliated primary school. Looks like there aren't any left. I wonder whose unlucky child this is. Won't father and mother be angered to death this time? After all, today was not even the first day of school. It was just a reporting day, but it turned out to be such a big deal. If nothing unexpected happened, this child who hit someone would probably be treated as an example and expelled directly by the school. Of course, according to the rules of the 9-year compulsory education, schools could not directly expel or dissuade students, but the school could give the students holidays. Other than making things difficult for them, the school had many other ways to make students transfer schools voluntarily. Moreover, today was only the registration day, and the information had not yet been submitted for review. The principal could delete the child's information at any time. Perhaps it was out of sympathy for the loss of a rabbit, But the group of parents immediately decided to repeatedly educate their children in the future. They must not make any mistakes and be expelled from school. Back to the principal. After the group of people arrived at the door of Year 1 Class 2's classroom, they did not directly enter the classroom. Instead, they asked the teacher to go in and call out the troublemaker. Nian Nian obediently followed the teacher out of the classroom. As soon as they stepped out of the door, the naughty child who had been crying nonstop looked as if he had seen his father's murderer. He immediately pointed at Nian Nian and shouted excitedly, "Mother, it's her. She's the one who hit me. Here. It hurts." After saying that, the naughty child raised his head and signaled his mother to see the palm print on his face. He was a child after all, and his skin was very delicate. Although Nian Nian did not use much strength, this slap was still solid and left a faint mark on his face. The young woman saw the palm print on the child's face, but she did not do anything. Instead, she silently looked at the principal. In this case, the principal naturally had to understand the situation first. Therefore, the teacher immediately went forward to explain. This was the capital's affiliated primary school, and all the children were enrolling on the first day. Naturally, the teacher could not be biased. Therefore, when the principal heard the whole story, he immediately agreed with the way the teacher handled it. The teacher did not do anything wrong. If it were any other school or any other teacher facing this situation, they would have done the same. It was wrong to lift the skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit someone. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with the judgment that the person who hit someone should apologize first, and the troublemaker should apologize later. But the problem now was, Nian Nian was like a tortoise who ate a scale today. No matter how the teacher communicated with her, she was determined not to admit that she was wrong. And children, in addition to being particularly prone to crying, actually had another characteristic, and that was, they were especially stubborn. They were even more stubborn than adults. Standing in front of her was the principal, the young woman holding the naughty child's hand, and the teacher in charge of each class. The teachers said one after another to guide the little fellow. As long as she apologized, the principal obviously would not make things difficult for this 6-year-old child. But unfortunately, Nian Nian did not apologize. She even said in front of the principal that she was determined not to apologize again. "I'm not apologizing. I'm not wrong. The person who lifted my skirt is a pervert. I'm not apologizing to a pervert." Even though she was surrounded in the middle, she did not show any fear on her face. In fact, it was not just the principal who came today. Even if God came, he would not be able to change her mind. Because this was a matter of principle that Chen Shi had repeatedly emphasized to her. Time had smoothed out our edges and corners, and time had eroded our hearts. The 6-year-old Chen Nian had not learned to be flexible. Therefore, her father's words were the truth sword in her hand, and also her stubbornness. Even if the whole world said that you were wrong, it was okay, her father was here. Seeing that the little fellow was still unwilling to admit her mistake, the principal could only sigh deeply in the end. Then he turned to the teacher and asked, "Where are the child's parents? Didn't they come out with us?" Hearing this, the teachers could not help but look at each other. They suddenly knew that things were not good. As expected, seeing that the little fellow's parents did not appear, the principal directly said to the teacher in charge of Year 1 Class 2, "Inform her parents. This kind of child. Our school can't educate her." Didn't I write it wrong before? So I'll write it according to my idea. What I want to write is about Nian Nian's growth. So I hope you understand. Under the protection of an eagle will never grow up. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 432. This kind of child. Our school can't educate her. Wasn't the meaning of this sentence clear enough? The principal was trying to dissuade the little girl. Although she was only a 6-year-old child, Nian Nian's actions today had already crossed the line. And the worst thing was, no matter how the teacher tried to guide her, Nian Nian was determined not to admit that she was wrong. Under these circumstances, even if the principal wanted to give her a chance to repent, he couldn't find a suitable reason to do so. After all, today was only the first day of school and not the usual day of classes. If she really entered the school, with this stubborn and violent temper of hers, who knew what kind of trouble she would cause in the future? This was a primary school affiliated to the capital, and at the same time, it was also the top public primary school in the country. He couldn't allow a single rat to spoil the entire pot of soup. The principal repeatedly deliberated for a long time. In the end, he made this seemingly unreasonable decision. Of course, the principal was actually very clear in his heart. For a 6-year-old child, her worldview had yet to be stabilized, so the child's every action was actually carried out according to the daily teachings of the parents. Rather than saying that it was the child's fault, it was more accurate to say that it was the parents' fault. But in the end, the child was the one to take the blame. Nian happened to bump into the muzzle of the gun, and because of this, she became the target of the principal's punishment. At this moment, no teacher spoke up to plead for her, and even the homeroom teacher of Year 1 Class 2 was silent. Seeing this, the young woman couldn't help but reveal a trace of satisfaction on her face. She gently touched the naughty child's face, as if hinting to her son, "Look, mother is standing up for you." Seeing that the principal had spoken, the homeroom teacher could only sigh deeply, then turned around and walked to the multimedia classroom, preparing to inform Chen Yan's parents to take the child away. But just as she was about to turn around, Qin Yongyan, who hadn't shown his face all this time, suddenly appeared behind her. Qin Yongyan had already stepped into the diviner realm. Although this level of cultivation couldn't achieve eternal youth, they could still maintain their appearance for decades. In order to not appear too different, Qin Yongyan deliberately made himself look a lot older, thus giving the impression that he was about 40 or 50 years old. With his cultivation level, he naturally knew what was going on outside. Therefore, as soon as he appeared, Qin Yongyan directly walked past the head teacher and came to the little girl. "Nian, come. Grandpa will take you home." He gently held the little fellow in his arms, and with a little force, the little fellow was lifted up by him. At this moment, the right or wrong of this matter was no longer important. Qin Yongyan respected Chen Shi's teaching methods, so as long as Nian believed that she was not wrong, then she really was not wrong. The one who was wrong was the brat, and that beautiful woman. At the same time, it was also the school's education method. Isn't it just a small school affiliated to the capital? What's the big deal? Was this the only school in Huaxia? It's okay, Grandpa will change the school for you. Qin Yongyan didn't even bother to greet the principal. Under the gaze of all the teachers, he carried the little fellow and walked straight to the school gate. The little fellow silently lay in Qin Yongyan's arms. After Qin Yongyan carried her out of the school gate, she couldn't help but look back at the school that had driven her away on her first day. In fact, she felt very wronged. But she didn't cry from beginning to end, because her father once said, "You can't cry when you're wronged. If you cry, it means you've lost." There's a group of people waiting to see you make a fool of yourself, especially those who have wronged you. The more wronged and sad you are, the happier and more complacent they will be. Qin Yongyan wasn't Chen Shi, so he didn't want to lower himself to the level of these ordinary people. The only solution he could think of was to change the school and environment for Nian. Therefore, after walking out of the school gate, Qin Yongyan took out his phone and called Wang Chuanju. Wang Chuanju was presiding over a department meeting, so she wouldn't have answered the phone. But she remembered that Qin Yongyan was an antique who didn't even use a cell phone. Something important must have happened if he suddenly called. Therefore, Wang Chuanju immediately stopped the meeting and walked out of the conference room with her phone. What? Transfer Nian. The capital affiliated primary school is close to home, and the quality of education is good. Why would she want to transfer schools? Wang Chuanju felt that Qin Yongyan's request was very strange, so she repeatedly asked over the phone. Qin Yongyan didn't want to say at first, but he couldn't stand her bombardment of questions, so he had to roughly explain the situation. But unexpectedly, after hearing the story, Wang Chuanju exploded on the spot. Even though they were separated by a door, her roar could be heard clearly in the conference room. What? Nian was expelled. Who did it? Don't go, I'll be right there. What do you mean I don't care? My granddaughter was bullied, and you want me to do nothing? Brother, I don't want to criticize you, But you really need to change your good temper. It's a good thing that Chun-Shi isn't at home now. Otherwise, with his daughter's temper, wouldn't he tear down the school today? Okay, don't say any more, I'll be right there. It had to be said that Wang Chuanji was really efficient. In the time it took Qin Yongyan and the little girl to wait for the bus, she had already rushed over with a group of people. As soon as they got off the bus, Wang Chuanji directly squatted in front of the little girl, then gently hugged her into her arms and patiently asked, "Nian Nian, tell Grandma, what's going on today?" Perhaps it was because Wang Chuanji was a woman. When the little girl saw her, she immediately pouted and said coquettishly, "Dad said that I'll hit whoever lifts my skirt. But the teacher said that I did something wrong and wanted me to apologize to him." Speaking of this, the little girl suddenly paused, and for the first time, an expression of grievance and sadness appeared on her face. In fact, when everyone said that she was wrong, how could she not have doubted her own actions? After all, she was not some stubborn brat. Although Grandpa said that she did nothing wrong, the little girl still seemed to have some self-doubt, so she could not help but ask doubtfully, "Grandma, was I really wrong?" The so-called right and wrong itself was a subjective meaning. Perhaps as long as Wang Chuanji said that she was wrong, the little girl would immediately change her mind and take the initiative to apologize to the brat. She was very sensible. And it was precisely because she was sensible that she would not be easily persuaded by outsiders. Qin Yongyan was not an outsider, and Wang Chuanji was not an outsider either. So as long as one of them said that she was wrong, the little girl would seriously reflect on it. Fortunately, Wang Chuanji did not give her a chance to reflect, but directly carried her up and strode towards the school gate. "What wrong? Your grandpa has a soft temper, likes to settle everything peacefully, and is not easily calculative with others. Because of this character, he used to be bullied in the village, so don't learn from him. If you want to learn from your father. Didn't your father often say this? We don't cause trouble, but we're not afraid of trouble either. Whether it's at school or elsewhere, in short, if you fall behind, you'll be beaten. If you're weak, you'll be bullied. So Nian Nian, you must remember. In the future, if anyone dares to lift your skirt, you'll beat him hard for me. Because not only did your father say this, but your grandma also said this." With Wang Chuanji's encouragement, the doubts in the little girl's heart suddenly disappeared, and a smile finally appeared on her face again. Looking at the valiant and high-spirited Wang Chuanji striding into the school gate, Qin Yongyan could only helplessly shake his head at the side. No wonder Qin Xueqing's character was so tough. Wasn't it all because of Wang Chuanji's teaching? The two sisters of the Qin family, Ruo Ying and Lin Qing. One was gentle like water. One was as strong as fire. Who knew? Who would Nian Nian look more like when she grew up? Please remember the domain name of the book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 433. With Wang Chuanji's strong appearance, there was a shocking turn of events. When the principal saw her take out a black ID, he immediately squeezed out a sincere smile on his face. It couldn't be helped. This was the world of adults. Their edges and corners had been smoothed out by time, and the corners of their mouths were raised into sophisticated smiles. Wang Chuanji was really too strong. No one knew what she said to the principal, but in a short while, Nian Nian was led back to the classroom by the class teacher with a smile. Children didn't hold grudges. But when the naughty child saw Nian Nian return to her seat as if nothing had happened, he couldn't help but have a flash of fear on his face. It was obvious that the naughty child was really afraid of this new classmate who beat him up at the slightest disagreement. Nian Nian was still young, so she didn't understand what Wang Chuanji's appearance meant. But the beautiful young woman was very clear that she might have kicked an iron plate today. So when she came out of the principal's office, she hurriedly left the school with the naughty child, as if she didn't want to stay here any longer. As Nian Nian returned to her seat, this farce also came to an end. Other than the naughty child being taken away by his mother, it was as if nothing had happened. And Nian Nian, the freshman who dared to beat someone on the first day of registration, became famous because of this battle. Now not only did the teachers in the school know that her background wasn't ordinary, even the students looked at her differently when they looked at her. After all, in a class, There were also class bullies other than top students. Fame was earned through fighting. The teachers didn't talk about what happened today, and the children were afraid that they would be the next to be beaten. So from today onwards, Nian Nian was already firmly sitting on the throne of Year 1 Class 2. The teachers of each class took the students to tour the school, and let the children familiarize themselves with the school environment. After that, the whole process of registration was over. The little guy was confused the whole day. After dinner, when she made a video call to Chunxi, she told her father about it. She didn't expect that after Chunxi heard about it, he repeatedly told her not to hit anyone in the future. As the saying goes, no one knows a son better than his father. Who doesn't know a father better than a son? Children were the closest people to their parents. How could they not be aware of the changes in their parents? Chunxi's previous education had long been deeply ingrained in Nian Nian's mind, so when he suddenly proposed a completely different education concept at this moment, the little fellow immediately felt a little strange, because these words were obviously in conflict with what Chunxi had said before, and it was also completely different from what Grandma had said. Looking at the lifelike Chunxi in the video, the little girl was at a loss. It was as if an error had occurred when a computer was running. The little guy's brain shut down. The child psychologist did not know the real Chunxi, so he could only guide the little guy in the correct way. But no matter how perfect the imitation was, a fake would always be a fake. Therefore, this seemingly small oversight planted a seed of doubt in the little fellow's heart. Perhaps she wouldn't be able to detect any abnormalities in the short term. But if time passed, by the time the little fellow turned into a little girl, this clumsy lie would probably burst like a bubble. Fortunately, the little fellow was still young. Even if she felt a little strange, she didn't directly question it over the phone. As usual, Chunxi comforted the little fellow, told her a few stories, and coaxed her to sleep. The little fellow nodded. But after hanging up the phone, she didn't seem to be sleepy at all. She turned over and directly leaned against Qin Ruoying. She still felt a little confused, so she leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and told her what she saw and heard today. Unfortunately, her mother was still sleeping quietly. The little fellow blinked and suddenly felt a little cold, so she softly called in the dark, "Big cat." Meow. After hearing her call, the big cat immediately jumped down from the beam and directly got into the little fellow's bed with a few leaps. Feeling the warmth from the big cat, the little guy blinked his eyes and turned to look at the window at the side. Tonight, the moonlight was like water. The moonlight shone through the window on the bedside. The little fellow hugged the big cat tightly and clung to Qin Ruoying. She couldn't help but murmur, "Big cat, where do you think Dad is going? Meow, when will he come back? Meow, I miss him so much." Perhaps he felt the strong longing in his daughter's heart. Chunxi suddenly woke up from his meditation. Perhaps because he had been meditating for too long this time. The moment he woke up, Chunxi even had the illusion that he was in a courtyard. But then, the endless darkness in front of him made him recognize the reality. Chunxi was still floating in the darkness. Looking at the timer beside him, he found that he had been meditating for as long as 200 years. There was no 60-year cycle in the mountains, and no one knew the year after the winter. Last time, Chunxi was imprisoned for 200 years. When his life was in danger, a light door appeared to save him. Now another 200 years had passed, and the light door still hadn't appeared. In this regard, Chunxi didn't panic at all. In fact, he had already guessed that the light door might be related to the mysterious woman. If he counted the time on Dragon Head Peak, the mysterious woman had actually saved him twice. Because the difference in their realms was too great, Chunxi could only silently remember the woman's life-saving grace, and didn't think about how to repay her. Chunxi watched the woman being dragged away by the chains. Naturally, he couldn't pin his hopes on the mysterious woman to escape. This time, he could only rely on himself. The way to escape was actually very simple. He just needed to enter the void realm. After 200 years of meditation, Chunxi was very sure that this dark space was actually not different from the big world. Both were small planes in the cracks of the void. It was just that the big world had been transformed by the grand pure divine ancestor, so it became a paradise that protected the ancient cultivators. Thinking of this, Chen-Shi looked around the void. After getting up and stretching his body, he sat down again with his legs crossed. These 200 years were not in vain. He kept thinking about the true meaning of the word void in his mind and successfully found a clue. Chen-Shi had already understood it, but because of the lack of clinical trials, he couldn't break through to the void realm. The tortoise breathing secret technique allowed him to retain abundant true yuan. So Chen-Shi now only needed to turn the deduction in his mind into reality. Void realm. Seeing through the void. Training the spirit to return to the void. And this was the third level that cultivators had to step on. Please remember the domain name of the book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor mobile version of reading website. Chapter 434. After 200 years of pondering and deliberating, Chen-Shi finally grasped the true meaning of the word void that his master once mentioned. What is void? It is the void and also the void. Seeing through the void and encompassing all things. Even if you haven't eaten pork, have you not seen a pig run? Chen-Shi had long known the main characteristics of Dongshu stage cultivators. They can freely travel through the universe, make summer mustard bags, and even open up their own small plane in the void. Apart from that, the biggest characteristic of Dongshu stage cultivators is that they are full of energy. Dongshu stage cultivators have reached the peak of their ability to sense and use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Therefore, even if they don't actively guide it, they can easily influence the spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby. Therefore, when Dongshu stage cultivators fight, any technique they use will be much more powerful than before. More importantly, as long as there is spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby, Dongshu stage cultivators will never face the predicament of being exhausted. Because the speed at which they breathe in and out spiritual energy is far more than the consumption of their techniques. Therefore, in theory, Dongshu stage cultivators will have the absolute advantage even if they are surrounded by countless Yuanying stage cultivators. If we use gaming terms to describe it, it would be, Yuanying stage cultivators can't even break through the defense. How can they hurt Dongshu stage cultivators? Of course, the above is all that Chen-Shi can see. The significance of Dongshu stage is much more than that. Maybe the mysterious woman left too deep an impression on Chen-Shi. So after ending the tortoise-like state, Chen-Shi can no longer calm down. He can't help but think about the process of the woman's appearance. In a trance, Chen-Shi suddenly understands why he can't see the woman's face or hear her voice. That's because the woman is not in the same plane as him. Everything that Chen-Shi had seen before was merely a projection of the woman, through countless small planes using her supreme magic power to appear in front of him. From the beginning to the end, the woman never really came to the dark space he was in. As for the terrifying aura that came after, Chen-Shi has reason to suspect the Great Terror was actually trying to find out the true reason why the woman projected herself into this world. However, the woman had used some unknown method to prevent the Great Terror from discovering his existence. That was how Chen-Shi managed to survive. The two mysterious experts flashed past Chen-Shi's eyes like comets, but they left an extremely deep impression on him. Chen-Shi kept thinking about everything related to the mysterious woman. Purple flames and azure lightning. The mysterious woman had 9 chains. The Great Terror in the depths of the void, as well as his 200 years of contemplation and contemplation. All sorts of seemingly unrelated events converged together. Suddenly, Chen-Shi understood. It was like playing the ice bucket challenge in the middle of winter. When a basin of ice water was poured over his head, he suddenly felt enlightened. The word void was too mysterious. It could be understood as both the void and nothingness. The former meant space, while the latter meant matter. In the dark space, there was only space and no matter. The only matter was himself. Just like the Summer mustard seed bag, this dark space seemed endless, but in fact it couldn't be any smaller. Since Chen-Shi was in the dark space, then he was part of the space, so the space was infinitely large for him. But if he jumped out of the space and looked back at this dark space, how big could it be? It might be as big as the sun, or as small as a speck of dust. But all of this, what did it have to do with him? He was no longer a reference object in it, but an observer outside of it. The sun might be big, but as long as he flew out of the solar system, the sun would become a tiny star. Everything was relative. Nothingness and the void. Space and matter. They seemed unrelated, but they were closely related. And this was obviously the so-called true meaning of the word void. Chun-Chi understood the key, so what he had to do next was to put his thoughts into practice. So he closed his eyes again. This time, there were no more distracting thoughts in his mind. Understanding and breaking through are two different things. So when Chun-Chi opened his eyes again, another 100 years had passed. A full 300 years. Chun-Chi had finally endured until this moment. Therefore, the moment he opened his eyes, the surging true essence suddenly surged out of his body, and then spread out in circles. But then the true essence was like tentacles, and was all pulled back by Chun-Chi. He was looking for the law threads left behind by the mysterious woman. When people walked through the snow, they would leave a trail of footprints on the snow. Although Chun-Chi understood the true meaning of the word void. But because there was no spiritual energy in this place, he had not truly broken through to the Dongxu stage. Right now, he could not use his own strength to forcefully break through the void, so he needed to find the door of light that the woman opened for him. The snow melted. The door of light also disappeared. But the law threads that connected the two worlds still existed. Unless the woman personally destroyed it, this thread would forever exist between the two worlds. And this is the first law of heaven and earth that a cultivator must grasp, and also the biggest difference between the Dongxu stage and the ascended stage. One end is connected to the world, the other end is connected to the dark space. Chun-Chi could only find this law thread at the moment, because he had once used this law thread to travel between the two worlds. Maybe, when he breaks through again in the future, he will suddenly realize, even in this empty dark space, there were countless densely packed law threads. Every single one of them led to a different place. Chun-Chi still could not open a new law thread by himself, so he could only rely on the woman's power. He searched and searched and searched. Finally, he found it. To Chun-Chi, this thread could not be any thinner. If he did not understand the true meaning of the word void, he would not be able to sense the existence of this thread in his life. Of course, the so-called thread was just a concept. It actually refers to a cultivator's understanding of the law of heaven and earth. This was the first time Chun-Chi came into contact with the law of heaven and earth. Thus, the moment he discovered this law thread, he was so excited that he started to tremble. Chun-Chi could no longer suppress his excitement, and immediately reached out to touch the thread. The moment his finger touched the law thread, a golden light shone. The spirit energy from the world kept pouring out from the golden light. A smile that had not appeared in a long time appeared on Chun-Chi's face. After that, he did not stay any longer, and directly turned into a ray of light and entered the golden light. The world. I'm back. Please remember the domain name of this book.com. The mobile version of the book.com. Chapter 435. Unlike the previous time, Chun-Chi used his own ability to traverse through the two realms. After he flew out of the golden light, he naturally had a deeper understanding of the law threads. Chun-Chi looked up and saw the same towering trees and lush vegetation on the floating island. The great sun-moon star array dispelled the darkness and brought light to the large world. Everything in front of him was the same as the last time he was here. There seemed to be no changes. But after Chun-Chi looked around the floating island, he suddenly realized that the great sun-moon star array in the sky, which seemed to only be used for illumination, faintly contained strange patterns that even he could not understand. After realizing that something was wrong, Chun-Chi was not in a hurry to find Yuhuan Tianzuan to settle the score. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the ground and looked up at the sky with a serious expression on his face as he observed. The last time he was here, he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void. So he did not feel that there was anything special about this array. Now that he had comprehended the true meaning of the word void, and had even come into contact with the first law of heaven and earth, after careful observation, Chun-Chi suddenly realized that these patterns were not the array patterns that maintained the operation of the array, but a law thread that he had never come into contact with before. The sun-moon star array rotated in unison. 9 stars flew in the sky, 9 palaces in the sky. Chunshi looked at the bottom of the floating island thoughtfully. When he saw that the bottom of the floating island was still covered with stars, he suddenly had a guess. This array was not only used for illumination. That was because other than the many law threads above the floating island that guided the movement of the stars, there were also many law threads below the floating island that seemed to be there, but not there. They were silent in the void, like a huge net hanging below the floating island group. If the 120,000 floating islands were considered as a whole, then this array was like two huge nets, firmly sandwiching the islands in between. One net had the sun-moon-star array hanging on it, called Heaven's Net. The other net was deposited in the void called Earth's Net. After understanding the mystery, Chunshi guessed, this formation might be the final trump card left by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor for Tiandu. Once Tiandu faced a life-and-death crisis, the formation could instantly turn into a murderous formation and wipe out all enemies for Tiandu. Oh, it seems to be very powerful? After confirming the dangers of the Great Formation, Chunshi was still in no hurry to kill his way to Dragon Head Peak. Instead, he randomly grabbed an unlucky fellow on the floating island. Just like the last time, he had a time frame of reference this time, so he quickly found out from the mouth of this unlucky guy. It had only been a month since the battle on Dragon Head Peak. In other words, although Chunshi had been in the dark space for 300 years, only a month had passed in the Great World. If the previous 200 years were to be included, then from the time he opened the gate of heaven until now, a total of less than 2 months had passed. If Tiandu time was converted to Earth time, it should be about 16 months. December of 1 year. 1 year and 1 April. Nian was already more than 6 years old. Without him and Ying to accompany her this year, he didn't know if this child's birthday was happy. Thinking of this, Chunshi's longing for her suddenly overflowed like the Yellow River, uncontrollable. So, he didn't delay any longer. After casually knocking that unlucky fellow unconscious and throwing him to the side, Chunshi directly sat cross-legged in the air. As he entered a meditative state, the spirit chi of heaven and earth within a radius of 1,000 miles suddenly surged toward him like a tsunami. Under Chunshi's intentional guidance, the spirit chi of heaven and earth suddenly gathered in one place, almost turning into an almost translucent, huge funnel visible to the naked eye. The violent surge of spirit chi set off a huge storm. The storm spread in all directions, instantly causing several large floating islands in the vicinity to tremble. Rumbling noises kept ringing out. The nearby floating islands seemed to have experienced an earthquake. Not only were the residents on the islands terrified, but even the birds and beasts on the islands were so frightened that they scattered and roared. The spirit chi funnel grew larger and larger, and in a short while, it covered all the floating islands within a radius of 100 miles. And the spirit chi on the floating islands covered by the funnel all rushed toward Bicker. The direction of the bickering was exactly where Chunshi was. He was using his own strength, draining the dragon veins of hundreds of floating islands. When the spirit chi of heaven and earth entered the body, there should be a refining process. However, Chunshi was like a large factory at this moment. As long as the spirit chi entered his body, after a few assembly lines of processing, it would completely become a part of his body. The spirit chi surged faster and faster, and the accumulation of vital essence also increased. Chunshi didn't hide his aura at all, so his aura was rising at a speed visible to the naked eye. The early stage of the soul formation realm, the middle stage, the late stage, and then the peak stage. Under such crazy pressure, in just a few breaths' time, the accumulation of vital essence in Chunshi's body had already reached the peak. And as the funnel continued to expand, Chunshi's aura also became stronger and stronger. In the face of such a powerful aura, the residents on the nearest islands couldn't even stand steadily. At this moment, he didn't hide the killing intent in his heart. This killing intent seemed to have substance, and in the end, it turned into an invisible long sword. It soared into the sky and cut through the clouds. The sword pointed to the Dragon Head Peak. Bang, bang, bang. Hundreds of dragon drums sounded at the same time, and the dense drum sounds poured down like a rainstorm. At that moment, even the god generals on duty on the various islands were stunned. But then, they were like cats whose tails had been stepped on, and they couldn't help but let out a long cry. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Enemy attack! In an instant, everyone was in a panic, and the sky shook. Yuhuan Tianzuan was discussing something with the celestial venerables in the Emperor Hall, when they suddenly heard the warning of the 5 divine generals. A trace of surprise flashed across the faces of the celestial venerables. Since they were called the celestial venerables of the 10 directions, there were naturally 10 celestial venerables in Tiandu. Chen Shi was lucky last time, and just happened to arrive at Dragon Head Peak when the other celestial venerables were patrolling, so he only met the 3 celestial venerables, Yuhuan, Miao Fa, and Xianzhen. But today was different, with Yuhuan Tianzuan as the leader. Yujiang Taihua, Yinghua, and the other celestial venerables were all present at this moment. Therefore, after hearing the divine general's warning, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face darkened on the spot. It must be him. He was lucky enough to escape last time, and now he dares to come back. Does he really think there's no one in Tiandu? Before he finished speaking, Yuhuan Tianzuan summoned the Jade Huan glazed cup, and then suddenly turned into a ray of light, rushing towards the direction of the dragon drum. Seeing this, the 7 celestial venerables who had not experienced the battle on Dragon Head Peak couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. Was there a need to be so excited? Chapter 436. Other than Yuhuan, Miao Fa, and Xianzhen, the other celestial venerables had never personally fought with Chen Shi, so their understanding of Chen Shi came from the battle recordings on the Xiantian mirror. The 7 celestial venerables were very knowledgeable, so it was not difficult to discover through the battle recordings. Although Chen Shi seemed ferocious at that time, using his own strength to forcefully deal with the siege of 3 Empyreans, during the fight, he had been in a passive state the entire time, basically without any extra strength to fight back. The 3 celestial venerables almost took away half of Chen Shi's life, not to mention the 10 celestial venerables present. Therefore, after seeing Yuhuan Tianzuan so excited, the 7 celestial venerables could not help but feel a little puzzled. Looking at Yuhuan's aggressive manner, could it be that he had some personal grudge with that person? The 7 celestial venerables each had their own thoughts. As they pondered over the key points, they followed Miao Fa and Xianzhen to the direction of the dragon drum. The 10 celestial venerables going out to meet the enemy was a grand occasion in divine capital. They did not say that they were not allowed to watch the battle, therefore, the spectators could no longer suppress the excitement in their hearts. As long as they could fly, they followed the footsteps of the 10 celestial venerables, and rushed toward Chen Shi's location like a swarm of bees. For a moment, as long as the celestial venerables passed by the floating island, it was like a hornet's nest that was lit by a fire. In an instant, countless celestial venerables and above flew out. It had been a long time since the great world was so lively. Densely packed silhouettes continuously flew across the sky above the floating island like a swarm of locusts. The scene was even more shocking than the final battle in the movie Avatar. It had to be said that this troublemaker not only had a high cultivation, but also had courage that far surpassed ordinary people. As the saying goes, where there is life, there is hope. As long as one's cultivation reached the golden core stage and above, one's life was more important than anything else. The cultivation of immortal cultivators was not easy to come by, so how could they so easily give it up for nothing? What was the difference between Chen Shi's current actions and courting death? In order to fight back, he sacrificed his life for nothing. How unwise was such an action? Many people could not help but feel sorry for Chen Shi from the bottom of their hearts. However, even more people were filled with excitement, hoping to witness the fall of a heavenly venerate with their own eyes. With Yuhuan Tianzuan in the lead, the immortal cultivators of the great world quickly arrived at the periphery of the floating islands. The funnel that looked like a canopy of clouds had now turned into a gigantic cloud vortex, enveloping almost all of the floating islands within 1,000 miles. As the heaven and earth spirit chi continuously flowed into the center of the funnel, the floating island enveloped by the funnel gradually lost its vitality. At this very moment, the cloud vortex above the floating islands was like a ferocious beast from ancient times. Apart from sucking dry all the dragon veins on the floating islands, it also cast a huge psychological shadow on the islanders. This mysterious man who dared to make an enemy of Tiandu had yet to show himself, but the invisible pressure coming from his body weighed down on everyone's hearts like a huge rock. A sense of despair gradually spread through the crowd. It was only after Yuhuan Tianzuan's roar that this huge rock finally fell. Arrogant thief. There's a path to heaven, but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell, but you insist on coming. Generals of Tiandu, listen to my order. Follow me and set up the soul-capturing formation. This time, we must not let him escape. Yuhuan Tianzuan took the lead and led the 5 divine generals into the cloud vortex like a sharp arrow. His appearance was like a ray of light in the darkness, instantly clearing away the haze in everyone's hearts. The islanders raised their heads to look, and they could not help but reveal an excited expression as if they had just escaped death. In the end, Yuhuan Tianzuan was their spiritual leader. Unlike last time, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not care about his face this time, and forced himself to fight Qinshi one-on-one. Instead, he assumed a group fighting stance. However, when he rushed into the clouds, he suddenly realized that Qinshi's aura seemed to be much stronger than last time. Thinking of this, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face could not help but flash a trace of surprise, and a sense of uneasiness arose in his heart. However, when Miaofa and Xianzhen arrived, this feeling of uneasiness was thrown out of his mind in the blink of an eye. He was just a defeated opponent. Could it be that he could pierce through the sky today? For safety reasons, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not recklessly rush in alone. He was afraid of falling into Qinshi's ambush, so he immediately said to Miaofa and Xianzhen, "This person's behavior today is really strange. I'm afraid it's a trap. The two of you, follow me to find out what's going on." Hearing this, Miaofa and Xianzhen immediately nodded, then summoned their magic weapons and rushed into the depths of the clouds with Yuhuan Tianzuan side by side. At the same time, Qinshi, who was in the center of the vortex, slowly opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, the vortex formed by the spiritual energy above him began to rotate rapidly, and then poured down on him at a speed visible to the naked eye. There was no grand and unique scene of a breakthrough. When the vital essence in Qinshi's body accumulated to a certain level, he, who had mastered the true meaning of the word void, naturally broke through to the divine transformation stage, and then directly stepped into the Dongshu stage. The moment Qinshi stepped into the Dongshu stage, a faint golden light suddenly lit up on his eyebrows. From afar, it was a bit like when Erlangchen opened his heavenly eye in the TV series. Then this golden light gradually converged between Qinshi's eyebrows, and then completely disappeared. This was the first law of heaven and earth that he had mastered, also known as the divine mark. Once the divine mark appeared, the Dongshu stage would appear. Qinshi deliberately restrained his aura, so Yuhuan Tianzuan did not notice anything strange. When enemies meet, naturally, their eyes would be exceptionally red. Even though they were still far away, the two sides did not even say a word. As the saying goes, "My brother Long is ruthless and doesn't talk much." The moment he saw Qinshi, Yuhuan Tianzuan viciously threw the jade-glazed cup in his hand at him. It was still the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. Seeing this, Qinshi did not even condense the divine sword Dharma power. He directly formed a sword with his fingers, and then slashed at the 3 lanterns. It was still the first move of the moonlight sword technique. But after this sword slash, it instantly sucked away the little remaining spiritual qi in the surroundings, causing a strange vacuum to appear where the sword slash passed. This was the difference between the divine transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. If the divine transformation stage was compared to nitroglycerin, then the Dongshu stage was obviously nuclear fusion. There was a fundamental difference between the two. Therefore, the moment Qinshi's sword slash hit the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man, an explosion that was beyond everyone's imagination occurred. With a loud boom, the 3 lanterns were sent flying back. The 3 heavenly lords who were closely related to the 3 lanterns seemed to have been severely injured, and a strange flush appeared on their faces. Please remember the domain name of this book: 9 Heavens Divine Emperor mobile version website. Chapter 437. Above the floating islands. The huge cloud vortex obscured everyone's vision. They did not dare to approach the vortex, so they quietly floated around it. Looking up, the densely packed figures were like a swarm of locusts, almost covering half the sky. Just like the audience in the Colosseum in Rome, these descendants of ancient cultivators did not dare to make any noise, but there was still an inexplicable fanaticism in their eyes. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of a heavenly venerable with their own eyes. But no one expected that in addition to witnessing the fall of a heavenly venerable, they would also be fortunate enough to witness the birth of an ancient legend. With the arrival of the three heavenly venerables, Yuhuan, Miofa, and Xianzhen, a gap was torn in the cloud vortex that covered the sky. The three heavenly venerables were like three sharp arrows with tricolored divine flames on them, as they shot straight at the enemy in the depths of the vortex. For a moment, the golden myriad spirit ancient E, the purple sky incinerating purple flame, and the grayish-green netherworld ghost flame all bloomed with their own unique brilliance. The three flames intertwined and rose, burning fiercely, almost instantly burning away a large portion of the cloud vortex. At the same time, it also cleared the vision of the spectators. And it was precisely because of this clear vision that everyone witnessed what happened next with their own eyes. After the green sword light and the tricolored divine flame collided in the air, it was like a sharp sword piercing through a glass window. It strangely felt like a mirror shattering in the void. Boom. Following a huge explosion, a formless shockwave spread out. Wherever the shockwave went, spiritual energy surged and wreaked havoc. The spectators closer to the center of the battlefield felt as if their chests had been hit by a battering ram. They were actually sent flying by this invisible force just like that. All of you back off. Back off at least 5 kilometers. Divine generals of 5 directions, listen up. No one is allowed to come near this place. Fortunately, there were not only 3 heavenly venerables present today. The 7 heavenly venerables, including Yujiang, Taihua, and Yinghua, who had arrived later, saw the intensity of the battle and simultaneously pulled up a protective barrier around the periphery, saving many people in time. Although it was only the first move, the intensity of this battle was far greater than the battle on Dragon Head Peak. Feeling the powerful true essence fluctuations, the 7 celestial venerables' faces suddenly flashed with a trace of surprise. It was no wonder that Yuhuan would put on such a solemn expression. If it was a one-on-one battle, it was likely that none of the 10 Empyreans present were his match. In a battle between experts, one move was enough to determine the truth. The 7 celestial venerables merely watched the battle from afar, and did not personally step forward to fight with Chen Shi, so their feelings were naturally not as vivid as those of the 3 celestial venerables present. Chen Shi's seemingly casual slash, other than forcing the heaven, earth, and man lanterns to retreat, he had also directly injured the 3 celestial venerables who were related to the lives of the 3 lanterns. How could Yuhuan Tianzuan not be shocked? It wasn't like he hadn't fought with Chen Shi before. When he fought Chen Shi, who was at the peak of the soul formation stage, he didn't have the upper hand, but it wasn't as if he had no chance of winning. But now, Chen Shi was fighting against 3 celestial venerables alone, but he could still easily injure them. How was this possible? At this moment, not only was Yuhuan Tianzuan shocked, but even the 2 celestial venerables, Miao Fa and Xianzhen, were filled with shock and uncertainty. The 3 of them hesitated, and the scene temporarily returned to its original calm. Seeing this, Chen Shi wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he slowly flew up until he was at the same height as the 3 celestial venerables. Only then did he speak loudly to everyone present. This humble one is Chen Shi. I've already met all of you before, so I don't think I need to introduce myself too much, right? Actually, I've always wanted to sit down and talk with all of you, but you didn't even give me a chance to speak. I originally had no intention of making an enemy out of Tiandu. I just wanted to borrow the sky-bearing impersonation technique and use the floating dawn mirror. If all of you are reasonable, you should understand that you shouldn't make an enemy out of me for no reason. At this point, Chen Shi suddenly paused. Then he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan and said calmly, "Also, I want to clarify that I didn't kill Wuxiu." After hearing this, a trace of doubt flashed across Yuhuan Tianzuan's face. He frowned and seemed to want to say something, but then he heard Chen Shi continue. "So what I want to say now is, if all of you are willing to talk, Then I can give all of you another chance. Let's turn weapons of war into gifts of jade and silk, so as to avoid increasing the sin of killing. If not, everyone, please don't blame my sword for being merciless. Although Chunshi wasn't an unforgiving evil person, he wasn't a good person with a gentle temperament either. If the mysterious woman hadn't saved him, he would have died with hatred in his heart. Therefore, although his words seemed reasonable, in reality, he didn't leave any face for the 10 celestial venerables. This was deliberately embarrassing for Tiandu. Of course, if the other party honestly lowered their heads and admitted their mistakes, Chunshi could indeed consider letting them live. But, with the lofty status of the 10 celestial venerables, how could they easily lower their heads to others? What? Don't we, the 10 celestial venerables, need face? If they really agreed to Chunshi's request today, then how would the 10 of them face the generals of Tiandu in the future? How would they continue to rule the outside world with the face? From the beginning, Chunshi had already calculated the thoughts of the 10 celestial venerables. The reason why he wasted his breath was actually just to give himself a good reason to make a move, so that he could be more decisive when he took action later. Speaking of which, Chunshi was really a little mischievous, as expected. It would have been better if he hadn't said those words. After saying that, the 10 celestial venerables' expressions changed greatly. Among them, Celestial Venerable Sunblaze, who had the most fiery temper, was so angry that he directly summoned his natal magic treasure, Heaven-Splitting Axe. After that, Celestial Venerable Sunblaze ignored Celestial Venerable Yuzhang's obstruction and rushed toward Chunshi with his giant axe. Little thief, don't be so arrogant. Yu Huan, you guys watch on the sidelines for now. Let me deal with him alone. Yu Huan, Miaofa, and Xianjun couldn't gain any advantage over Chunshi, but Celestial Venerable Sunblaze didn't believe it. He raised his giant axe and fiercely chopped at Chunshi. Axes were different from swords. They were designed to be heavy and powerful, and must kill in one hit. Therefore, as Celestial Venerable Sunblaze chopped down with his axe, a strong wind immediately blew in the air. In terms of power, it was even more ferocious than the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. This kind of fighting style that only focused on killing and disregarded defense was actually very rare among immortal cultivators. Celestial Venerable Sunblaze relied on the indomitable fierceness in his bones to fight for the position of Celestial Venerable. Therefore, even if his cultivation wasn't at the top of the 10 Celestial Venerables, not many people dared to casually fight with him. He was a living brute. But today, this brute met an opponent who was even more reckless than him. Come on. Seeing that the giant axe was about to arrive, Chunshi's face suddenly flashed with a trace of excitement. He made a grabbing motion with his left hand, and a saber-like materialization weapon condensed in his hand. Then, Chunshi held the saber in his hand and directly faced the giant axe. Using strength to overcome strength. Using force to meet force. He wanted to take this opportunity to gauge the absolute power that he now possessed. Chapter 438. Just as Celestial Master Blazing Sun was wielding his heaven-splitting axe, and using all his strength to execute the 36 moves of the Heavenly Dipper Axe technique, Chunshi's mood could be accurately described with one idiom. And that was, elation at the sight of a prey. Different cultivation methods would naturally lead to different combat habits for immortal cultivators. Based on Chunshi's previous combat style, when faced with such a ferocious cultivation technique, Chunshi would definitely not meet it head-on. Instead, he would constantly twist and turn and restrain his opponent until he found a flaw in his opponent's aura. Only then would he decisively strike with his sword, hoping to achieve the desired result in one strike. The axe technique was ferocious, while the sword technique was nimble. Each of the 18 types of martial arts had their own unique characteristics. It was not easy to judge which one was better, and which one was worse. It was also because of the characteristics of the axe technique that Celestial Master Blazing Sun's move was not necessarily exquisite. However, it was definitely incomparably violent. Even if Yu Huan and the others joined forces, they did not dare to meet it head-on. Of course, just because Yu Huan and the others did not dare to meet it head-on did not mean that Chunshi did not dare to meet it head-on. This was his first battle after stepping into the insightful emptiness realm, so he naturally treated this battle as a testing ground for his sword. Therefore, Chunshi abandoned the sword technique he was most proficient in, and instead used the red sun saber technique, which he had not used often before. He was prepared to meet Celestial Master Blazing Sun's axe head-on, hoping to see how much progress he had made. Therefore, the moment he raised his hand and swung his saber, Saber Chi was born, instantly cutting through the void and soaring into the sky. At the same time, the area within a radius of several hundred feet was shrouded in Saber Chi, as if it wanted to destroy everything within range. It was impossible to dodge, and was at the mercy of others. And this was the third move of the Red Sun Saber technique. One saber cleaves the sky, one with the saber. Great clumsiness turned into simplicity, one saber was enough. As the heaven-splitting axe came crashing down, a bright saber light with a hint of coldness shot out from the tip of the saber. Then, with an incomparably violent and domineering aura, it slashed directly at the incoming Celestial Master Blazing Sunday. At this moment, almost all the spectators, including the 10 Celestial Masters, could not help but hold their breaths, for fear of missing any exciting scenes. However, what happened next disappointed them. For some unknown reason, the moment the tip of the saber touched the edge of the axe, the giant axe formed from celestial venerate sunblazes true yuan chi melted like snow under the blazing sun, and slowly dissipated into the void. This feeling was very strange. It was as if one side was holding a tempered steel knife, while the other side was holding an axe carved out of ice. Therefore, as soon as the two came into contact, the axe shattered into countless ice shards. Sigh, seeing this, Chunshi sighed silently. In the end, he still couldn't hold it in. After all, how could he, who had already grasped the laws of heaven and earth, be like before, only rely on the enormous amount of true essence to fight? If that was the case, wouldn't a Dongshu stage Xiuxianist become a brute with nothing but brute strength? In fact, the moment Heavenly Venerate Sunblaze swung his axe, Chunshi saw numerous law threads on his body. Therefore, he only needed to cut off one of them to easily neutralize Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze's attack. Until this moment, Chunshi finally understood the gap between the Divine Transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. True Yuan was no longer the only standard to measure one's strength. Understanding and grasping the laws of heaven and earth was the direction he needed to study in the future. The more laws he grasped, the closer he was to the Great Tao. So unknowingly, he had already reached this step. Thinking of this, Chunshi's excitement from his breakthrough immediately calmed down. When he turned his head to look at Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others again, there was only a pale feeling left in his heart. That was dull and uninteresting. So what if they were Tiandu? So what if they had more people? They were no longer on the same level. The reason was simple. It was like an adult fighting kindergarten children. Even if there were 100 children standing opposite him, he wouldn't feel any pleasure after destroying them. Punch at the Nanshan nursing home, kick at the Beihai kindergarten. This was just a joke. Perhaps this was the after effect of advancing to the next level. At this moment, in Chunshi's eyes, this great world that carried all the hopes of the ancient cultivators was no different from the Beihai kindergarten. He silently looked around the room. Wherever he looked, the other party would reveal a nervous and somewhat flustered expression. It was just a casual slash. Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze, who was known for his martial prowess in the divine capital, was seriously injured. Now he had been brought back to the Dragon Head Peak by the divine generals to heal. Seeing this, the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns immediately took out their life magic treasures, as if they were facing a great enemy. They were prepared for any possible attacks from Chunshi. For a moment, there was a strange silence. When Chunshi saw their laughable expressions, he couldn't help but think of the mysterious woman in the dark space. Perhaps in the eyes of that mysterious woman, he should be as insignificant and laughable as these people in front of him, right? The Great Tao was endless. There was always a mountain higher than another. If he didn't jump into this small pond, he would never know how high the sky was and how wide the earth was. Thinking of the realm that the mysterious woman might reach, even Chunshi couldn't help but yearn for it. However, Yearning was yearning, reality was reality. The reality was, Ying was still waiting for him to save her. Nian was still waiting for him to go home. What were they waiting for? Therefore, after seeing the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns take out their life magic treasures, Qinshi couldn't help but smile at them and say, "All of you come together, I'm in a hurry." As soon as his voice fell, a divine sword appeared in his right hand. Then, Qinshi held a sword in one hand and a saber in the other, and took the initiative to rush toward the 10 heavenly sovereigns in front of him. Don't be afraid. Everyone, attack together. This old man really doesn't believe that he can overturn the heavens. Yuhuan Tianzuan was also a ruthless person. Although he didn't understand why Qinshi was able to defeat heavenly sovereign Yang Yan in one move, he didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, when he saw Qinshi make a move, he took the lead to face him. It was still the same 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man combined attack. But this time, they were not facing Qinshi, who was at the peak of the semi-god realm. It was Qinshi, who was at the early stage of the void transformation realm, and already had killing intent in his heart. I've already given you a chance. It's you who didn't cherish it. Then don't blame me for being ruthless. After saying that, Qinshi couldn't help but let out a long roar towards the sky, and the sword in his hand suddenly glowed with a faint cold light. The third move of the combination of sword and saber. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse of heaven and earth could be shattered. Chapter 439. 3 styles of saber, 3 styles of sword. 3 styles of saber and sword. 3 styles of endless, 9 styles of returning to one. As soon as he finished speaking, Qinshi held the sword in his right hand, and the saber in his left. With a shocking momentum, he charged toward the 10 celestial sages not far away. At this moment, one of the 10 celestial sages was injured. Although the remaining 9 were a little worried about the strength that Qinshi had shown before, after being provoked by Qinshi again and again, the 9 celestial sages were obviously completely provoked. Evil thief, don't be so arrogant. This is the hinterland of Tiandu, under the shadow of the divine ancestor. How can you be so presumptuous? Everyone, let's take him down together. By Su Qingtian's order. As Yuhuan Tianzuan's words fell, the 9 of them no longer cared about their identity, and almost simultaneously took out their famous natal magic treasures. As various magic treasures flew out of their hands, the field suddenly shone brilliantly, showing the mighty divine power. Seeing that the battle was about to start, even the 5 divine generals, whose strength was second only to the celestial sages, retreated 10 miles away at this moment, not daring to take half a step forward. After all, this was a battle of the celestial sages. It was also the first time that the 10 celestial sages had joined forces to deal with one person. Therefore, no matter the result, today's battle was enough to be called unprecedentedly brilliant. Perhaps it was to make this battle more legendary. The moment Qinshi raised the saber and sword in his hand, even time seemed to stop flowing, and everything in the void was silent. The third style of the divine skill. Combination of saber and sword. The saber is formless, the sword is formless, the vast expanse shatters heaven and earth. When he was still in the heavenly jade world, Qinshi had already used this move. However, at that time he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he could only force the move with a huge amount of vital essence. At this moment, Qinshi finally stepped into the insightful void realm. Therefore, when he used this move again, he suddenly had a different feeling in his heart. It turned out that this move actually involved the application of the laws of heaven and earth, and could only be smoothly used by those above the insightful void realm. The saber is formless, the sword is formless. Its purpose was to shatter heaven and earth. Qinshi swung the sword and saber in his hand. An endless saber and sword chi burst out in the void. Aura fluctuations could not be concealed, so the celestial venerables immediately felt that there seemed to be thousands of swords slowly forming in front of him. However, when they focused their gazes, they did not find anything strange. That was because this move had chi but was formless. It was exactly the same as that sentence. The blade was formless, and the sword was formless. The chi of the saber and sword, which contained the essence of the word void, was like a huge net in the void, suddenly covering the 9 celestial venerables. The 9 celestial venerables did not notice anything strange. Only when the net of chi from the saber and sword came crashing down did everyone realize that they had fallen into Qinshi's trap. There was almost no warning. It was as if they had stepped into a void, and there was no end to their surroundings. Yuhuan Tianzuan tried to struggle, but found that he couldn't. It was as if he was trapped by something invisible. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. He quickly mobilized all the true qi in his body, trying to forcibly break free from the shackles. However, at this moment, his body suddenly felt pain, and countless bloody marks suddenly burst out all over his body. As if falling into a red dye vat, the 9 celestial venerables' clothes were instantly soaked with blood. Even with the protection of treasures, it was difficult for them to withstand the power of this move, because this move was simply unpredictable and impossible to dodge. It was hidden in the void. If one did not comprehend the essence of the word void, it was basically impossible to detect it. And this was the terrifying part of the third divine skill, turning nothingness into something. The world was filled with saber and sword qi, formless and formless. At this moment, it was a flower. At that moment, it was a bird. At the next moment, it was a scorching sun in the sky. From the perspective of a bystander, it was as if nothing had happened. However, the 9 celestial venerables' bodies were oozing blood very strangely. Just as everyone was feeling a little puzzled, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly looked up to the sky and let out a fierce howl. Then he gritted his teeth and ignited a drop of blood essence in his body. One had to admit that this old man did have some eyesight. Once he saw that the situation was not right, he actually directly put on a desperate posture. At the price of burning his blood essence, he forcefully tore a gap in Qinshi's saber and sword qi net. After escaping, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not waste any time. He directly recalled the Jade World glazed cup, and then used the ancient spirit Yi to save the few celestial venerables beside him. Yuhuan Yu. Looking at Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was covered in blood qi, a trace of shock appeared on Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's face. Hearing that, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not immediately reply. Instead, he looked at Qinshi with eyes full of resentment. This person is not the same as before. He must have had some fortuitous encounter and stepped into the legendary supreme stage. This sentence was like a bucket of cold water poured over their heads, instantly extinguishing the burning battle intent in their hearts. Supreme stage. That was an existence that surpassed Empyreans. Ever since the Grand Pure Saint ancestor passed away, the strength of the great world had begun to decline. It had been a long time since a supreme stage existence had appeared. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not give them too much time to think. Instead, he continued, "This person is not from our Tiandu. He is an external enemy. If we avoid him, how will we have the face to worship the sacred ancestor in the future? Tiandu's 10,000 years of inheritance, the sacred ancestor's illustrious name. Is it going to be destroyed in our hands today? This old man is unwilling, and also unwilling. Only because I am one of the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu." These words were so beautiful that it was as if the 8 Empyreans present had been injected with chicken blood. Their faces immediately surged with boundless pride. That's right. So what if you're a sovereign? Since we are the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu, how can we easily lower our heads to others? This seemingly long and tedious conversation actually happened in the blink of an eye. Therefore, just as Qinshi was about to deliver the final blow, the remaining 8 Empyreans actually ignited the blood essence in their bodies. In an instant, the true essence fluctuations caused by the 9 Empyreans burning their blood essence were like the setting sun dyeing a large area of the sky red. Seeing this, Qinshi couldn't help but flash a trace of admiration on his face. Immortal cultivators couldn't lose their courage. He didn't expect that the 10 Empyreans had been in high positions for so many years, but the sword in their hearts hadn't rusted because of this. His opponent was so valiant, how could he fall behind? Therefore, this time, Qinshi didn't think of avoiding the spearhead at all. Instead, he immediately brandished his sword to meet it. At this point, the result of this battle was destined to be a fight to the death. Then the 10 Empyreans united and displayed all that they had learned in their lives. They charged towards the legendary Supreme Stage in their strongest state. And Chunxi displayed the elegance of the Void Stage. With his own strength, he fought 9 Soul Formation Stage cultivators who were burning their blood essence and risking their lives. This battle was unprecedentedly bright. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 440. As the battle gradually reached its climax, earth-shattering explosions rang out one after another. The multicolored True Yuan was like an aurora, slowly flowing in the air above the floating island. As long as the true essence energy came into contact with Chunxi's saber and sword Qi net, it would explode with a blinding light. The scene was like magnesium powder meeting fire. Shockwaves would always follow the explosion. Wave after wave of shockwaves crashed into the nearby floating islands, causing the islands below to tremble violently. If not for the fact that both sides were virtuous enough to subconsciously carve out a few moves before making a move, countless floating islands would have already been smashed to pieces. This was a battle between heavenly venerables. Although it looked like a dazzling battle, it actually contained countless murderous intents. Thus, even from 5 kilometers away, the spectators could still feel an extremely powerful murderous intent. No one dared to take a step forward. As long as they came into contact with the saber and sword Qi net or the rainbow divine light, they would definitely be shredded into pieces. Almost everyone's hearts tightened, including the 10 heavenly venerables. Because there was a time limit to burning blood essence. Not only did Chunxi know this, but even the 9 heavenly venerables knew this very well. Time was of the essence, so the 9 of them wanted to use all their strength to defeat Chunxi in one fell swoop before the blood essence was completely burned. But how could Chunxi let them do as they wished so easily? Perhaps it was because Heavenly Venerable Sunblaze was absent, but the 10 Directions Immortal Extermination formation that the 9 Heavenly Venerables had set up was clearly lacking in maturity. After grasping the true meaning of the word void, Chunxi could always immediately discover the flaws in the 9 Heavenly Venerables' joint attacks, even if he didn't deliberately pay attention to them. Thus, the 9 Heavenly Venerables' joint attacks were always easily resolved by Chunxi. The 9 of them working together still couldn't hurt Chunxi. Once the blood essence was completely burned, what would they use to deal with him? At this thought, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately became impatient. Even the frequency of his attacks became more and more hurried. However, being impatient wouldn't help at all. Instead, it would only expose his shortcomings even more quickly. After the two sides had exchanged more than 1,000 moves, Chunxi deliberately revealed a flaw and pretended to be pinned down by Empyrean Yu Jiang. At the same time, he deliberately exposed his back to Empyrean Yu Huan. Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan fell for it. The old man felt that the opportunity was not to be missed, so he directly broke out of the formation and viciously smashed the glass cup at Chunxi's back. As the Jade Universe glazed cup flew out of his hand, the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying formation, which had been greatly weakened due to Celestial Venerable Sunblaze's absence, immediately fell apart. At this time, Chunxi seemed to have expected this. He suddenly forced Wondrous Spell Heavenly Lord back with a slash of his saber. Then he decisively pulled back his sword, allowing the sword that had been accumulating power for a long time to point directly at Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan only saw a cold light flash before his eyes. He didn't even have time to defend himself before the sword pierced through his protective aura and through his body, drawing a long line of blood in the air. Pooh! After suffering such a heavy blow, Yuhuan Tianzuan lost his ability to fight on the spot and instantly fell from the sky. If Heavenly Lord Inghua hadn't reacted quickly and caught him in time, Yuhuan Tianzuan would have fallen directly into the endless void below. The formation has been broken. We are in danger. Everyone, quickly retreat to the Imperial Hall and regroup. We will wait for an opportunity. Go quickly. I will stop him. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell was indeed somewhat courageous. Seeing that the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying formation had collapsed due to Yuhuan Tianzuan's injuries, he advanced instead of retreating. He held the 8 Views Palace lantern and brazenly faced Chen-Shi. However, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was only at the early stage of soul formation, couldn't block Chen-Shi, who was at the early stage of void transformation, even if he burned his blood essence. Thus, in the instant that the other 7 people turned around and flew away with Yuhuan Tianzuan, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was covering for them, was struck by Chen-Shi's sword. As a result, he fell from the sky and heavily smashed into the floating island below. A 1,000-mile journey collapsed because of an ant's nest. Because of Yuhuan Tianzuan's momentary mistake, the 10 Directions Celestial Lords were instantly defeated. In gaming terms, that would be, the configuration of their formation was too low, and the margin for error was almost zero. A single mistake would instantly cause them to be wiped out. After Chen-Shi defeated Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, he didn't rush to finish him off. Instead, he immediately chased after the 8 fleeing Celestial Lords. Seeing this, Heavenly Lord Yujiang, who was the strongest among them, decisively stepped forward and replaced Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell to cover for everyone. However, Chen-Shi was like a madman who had gone berserk. As soon as the two of them met, Heavenly Lord Yujiang was slashed down by his sword and fell straight into the void below. Wondrous Spell and Yujiang fell one after another. Even if they excluded the heavily injured Yuhuan, there were still 6 people left. Thus Heavenly Lord Xuanjin stepped forward. They couldn't delay for too long, but this method of covering the rear greatly lengthened the battle line. As a result, after Chen-Shi repelled Xuanjin with his sword, Dragon Head Peak appeared not far in front of them. At this moment, Chen-Shi didn't need to think with his but to know. They were going to activate the Great Sun-Moon Star Formation. Since this formation was the final killing move that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had left behind for Tian Capital, it must have its unique features. Chen-Shi didn't think that he was a match for the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, so he deliberately lured everyone to the periphery of the floating islands. His goal was to make the 10 Heavenly Venerables stay away from the Imperial Polarity Hall and prevent them from activating the formation at any time. Chen-Shi had achieved his goal. However, he still didn't expect the 10 Heavenly Venerables who held high positions would have the courage to burn their blood essence and sacrifice themselves at the same time. Xuanjin fell. Yinghua stepped forward again. The Heavenly Venerables, who used to be high and mighty, fell one after another, but the remaining few stood up resolutely and continued to cover the rear for their companions. Although they couldn't block 1 or 2 moves from Chen-Shi, they could create some obstacles for Chen-Shi, and buy some time for everyone to escape. When only 3 Heavenly Venerables were left beside Yuhuan, the group of 4 finally flew to Dragon Head Peak. For Tian Capital, for the Divine Ancestor's reputation. Go Yuhuan. We'll do our best to buy time for you. A fierce look flashed across the Taihua Heavenly Venerable's face. Then he and the other 2 Heavenly Venerables turned to face Chen-Shi, who was chasing after them with a sword. Seeing this, Chen-Shi couldn't help but yell fiercely, "Get lost!" The battle was coming to an end. As long as the 3 people in front of him were defeated, Tian Capital would have no chance of counterattacking. Therefore, Chen-Shi no longer held back and decisively used his killing move. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse could shatter the universe. The sound came with the sword, its momentum unparalleled. The 3 Heavenly Venerables with the lowest cultivation didn't even have time to scream before they were completely pulverized by the billions of saber lights and sword shadows. However, it was also because they risked their lives to stop Yuhuan Tianzuan successfully flew to the front of the Imperial Polarity Hall. As soon as he landed, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly let out a long howl and slammed his palm into the center of the square. In an instant, the entire floating island trembled violently. Feeling the tremors from Dragon Head Peak, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but tremble with excitement. After tens of thousands of years of silence, the array pattern that the Divine Ancestor personally engraved on the square finally showed its brilliance to the world. Divine Ancestor above. The Emperor's majestic North Tower. The Divine Ancestor's vast kindness shakes the southern sky. Fortunately, we did not disappoint you. Chapter 441. I wish everyone a happy new year. I'm sure you'll be rich this year. It's New Year's Day, so all my relatives and friends will come over to play. I'm busy cooking at home, so I really can't write. I hope everyone can bear with me in the new year. I'll remember to update it. I'll update it at night and in the morning. I'm so moral. Happy New Year. Returning from cultivation to become a stay-at-home dad. Please wait a moment. After the content is updated, please refresh the page to get the latest update. Chapter 442. As Yu Huan Tianzuan slammed his palm down, the formation runes engraved on the plaza began to glow. Just as Chun Shi had expected, this formation was indeed the final killing move left behind by the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor for Tiandu. Ever since the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor led the ancient cultivators to build Tiandu, this formation had been engraved on Dragon Head Peak. But what was strange was that the ancient books left behind by the Pure Sky Saint Ancestor did not record any description of this formation, so no one knew what this formation was used for. Perhaps it was an illusion formation, perhaps it was a killing formation. In short, it should not be activated unless it was absolutely necessary. Speaking of which, it was important to mention something important. It was not that Chun Shi did not want to stop the formation from activating, but that he could not stop it at all. Unless he could kill the 10 Celestial Venerables in one move, the 10 Celestial Venerables would activate the formation at the most dangerous moment. This was a paradox in itself. After all, the formation carried Tiandu's last hope, and was also the foundation of Tiandu's standing in the great world. Just like playing cards, when Yu Huan Tianzuan lost everything, he would naturally place his hopes on this trump card. And now, it was time to reveal this trump card. It had to be said that this trump card was indeed somewhat extraordinary. As the formation runes on the plaza appeared one after another, the great sun-moon star formation above the floating islands suddenly dimmed a lot, and the entire great world fell into darkness. Seeing this, Chun Shi could not help but be on guard and carefully analyze the changes in order to find the location of the formation's life gate as soon as possible. Whether it was an illusion formation or a killing formation, there would usually be 2 life and death gates when setting it up. On one hand, it was to prevent the formation from covering their allies, and on the other hand, it was convenient for the person setting up the formation to enter and exit the formation. But what made Chun Shi feel a little strange was, the formation in front of him did not seem to have 2 life and death gates. As soon as the formation was activated, one after another, flickering lines of law slowly appeared in the void. Even if Yu Huan Tianzuan had not grasped the true meaning of the word void, he could still see these lines of law with his naked eye. Of course, in Yu Huan Tianzuan's eyes, these lines of law were just waves of vital essence. The lines of law crisscrossed in the void. From afar, it looked like a large net covering the entire great world. Then, these lines of law tightened, and the 120,000 floating islands became fish and shrimps in the net. At the same time, the soul mirror stored in the Imperial Hall suddenly released a dazzling golden light, and flew to the center of the plaza with a whoosh. The formation runes in the center was a circular shape, with a circular hole in the middle. After the soul mirror flew, it directly landed on the circular hole. Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan stared blankly at everything before him. Although the formation to Tianzuan, was it to the sky to it to was. However, just as he was absent-minded, the soul mirror actually automatically combined with the formation patterns. Immediately after, an extremely intense true essence fluctuation erupted, and actually blasted Heavenly Venerable Yu Huan flying far away all of a sudden. Something unexpected happened. The great world. The 120,000 floating islands began to shake violently under the influence of an unknown force. The spirit energy on the floating islands originated from the dragon veins on the various islands, but now, these dragon veins were like a volcanic eruption, gushing out and gathering at the peak of Dragon Head Peak. The spirit energy surged crazily in one place, and for a moment, it caused an unprecedented spirit energy tide in the great world. Seeing this, Chun Shi no longer cared about snatching the soul mirror, and turned to leave the center of the storm that had yet to form. But what he didn't expect was, even though he had already stepped into the insightful emptiness realm, he was still like a 3-year-old child in front of the Grand Pure One's laws. He couldn't use brute force to tear open this gradually tightening net. The inescapable net formed by the lines of law tightened, and the 120,000 floating islands gathered in one place. The floating islands in the center were still fine, as there was still some space between them, so no collisions occurred. But the floating islands at the edge were in trouble. Many of the floating islands were pushed by the net, and they collided with the nearest floating islands. The scene was so tragic that it was like a serial car accident on the highway. In an instant, mountains collapsed, the earth cracked, and rocks flew. The residents on the islands were howling in grief. After seeing the tragic situation at the periphery of the floating islands, Yuhuan Tianzuan felt a chill run down his back, and his heart was filled with inexplicable fear. He would never have thought. The formation left behind by the Grand Pure One was not to defend against enemies, but to destroy Heaven Capital's foundation. Grand Pure One. Could this be the last hope you left for Heaven Capital? Hope. Ha 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 ha. Seeing the floating islands in the distance continuously colliding and sinking, Yuhuan Tianzuan was filled with despair. He wanted to use this opportunity to turn the tables, but who would have thought the result would be like this? After receiving such a blow, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly seemed to have gone crazy, and he couldn't help but sit at the edge of the square and laugh wildly. Unlike Yuhuan Tianzuan's despair, Chunxi seemed to have realized the crux of the matter. Thus, he immediately turned and rushed toward the soul mirror in the center of the square, and at the same time, he slashed out with his sword in an attempt to destroy it. Chunxi had used 10% of his strength in this attack. But after he slashed out, the soul mirror embedded in the center of the square was like a black hole, and it almost instantly swallowed up the sword light. Even a stone thrown into the water would cause a splash, but Chunxi's sword light did not even cause a ripple. Seeing this, Chunxi did not panic. Instead, he continued to slash at the soul mirror, trying to forcibly stop the formation's operation. But no matter how many times he slashed, the result was the same. As soon as the sword light approached the soul mirror, it seemed to be affected by something and was directly swallowed up by the soul mirror. It did not even cause the slightest movement, and it disappeared without a trace. And just as Chunxi was thinking about how to destroy the formation patterns in the square suddenly emitted a faint energy fluctuation like an energy cannon that had been fully charged. Chunxi sensed that something was wrong. Just as he was about to take a closer look, the soul mirror in the center of the square suddenly emitted a blinding light. The light was so strong that it was not inferior to the sun. Chunxi subconsciously blinked. But at this moment, an extremely strong gravitational force suddenly came from where the soul mirror was. Chunxi was caught off guard, and was directly pulled to the ground by this gravitational force. At the same time, all the floating islands that were enveloped by the light were like space stations that had lost control, and were rapidly flying toward the center of the light. Chapter 443. A beam of light suddenly shot out from Dragon Head Peak, followed by an extremely powerful gravitational force. This gravitational force was so strong that it could even drag Chunxi down from the sky, let alone other objects in the great world. No one or object could resist this powerful gravitational force. It seemed to have combined all the spiritual energy in the great world. The moment the light appeared, it pulled all 120,000 floating islands to the vicinity of Dragon Head Peak. The scene was so spectacular that it could be described as hundreds of barges and thousands of sails competing. One after another, the floating islands collided in the void. Each collision would set off an earth-shattering boom, accompanied by the cries and wails of countless living beings. Many of the weaker cultivators were turned into dust on the spot in the collision. Even those with higher cultivation, such as the 5 divine generals, could not escape the pull of the strong light even though they could successfully avoid the collision of the peaks. This scene was very similar to a flush toilet. One only needed to gently press the switch, and all the filth and turbidity in the world would rush into the sewer along with the rapid flow of water. Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was closest to the strong light, was the first to disappear. He did not even have the time to scream before he was sucked away by the strong light in the blink of an eye. Immediately after, the Imperial Extreme Hall also turned into thousands of dust and debris and disappeared into the strong light. Then the flowers, trees, sand, and stones on Dragon Head Peak, whether it was birds, beasts, divine generals, or star lords, as long as they were enveloped by the strong light, they would be instantly sucked in and completely disappear. This strong light was like a white hole, crazily devouring everything in the great world. After swallowing Dragon Head Peak, it began to devour the surrounding floating islands as if it would never be full. Chunshi bitterly resisted the strong gravitational force brought about by the strong light. He looked back at the square and found that it had completely turned into a white sphere of light. The strong light came from the central region of this sphere of light, and there was a strange black region at the edge of the sphere that looked like a ribbon in the void. In any case, Chunshi was someone who had seen big scenes. Therefore, after seeing such a scene, a term immediately popped up in his mind: a white hole. One must know that in the vast universe, in addition to the black hole that could even swallow light, there was also an existence with a completely opposite nature. This was the white hole. To put it simply, if the black hole was the entrance to a certain space, then the white hole would be the exit of this space. The black hole was responsible for swallowing, while the white hole was responsible for spitting. Once the Grand Pure Saint Ancestors Sun-Moon Star Formation was activated, all the objects in the large world would be gradually wrapped up in an inescapable net and stuffed into a white hole. Then, through the white hole, these objects would be sent to another unknown world. Chunshi didn't want to be sent to some strange place again. Therefore, when he realized the true function of the formation, he used all his strength and began to struggle madly. In any case, he was at the Dongshu stage. Thus, his efforts played a certain role in the end. As a result, he was able to successfully go against the current and arrive at the border of the heavenly network. The heavenly network was formed by the threads of law. Chunshi tried to touch it, but realized that these laws weren't something he could control at his current stage. Therefore, he immediately took out the sword in his hand and tried to tear this large net apart with brute force. However, no matter how hard he tried, the large net didn't budge. And as the inescapable net tightened, by the time most of the 120,000 floating islands had been swallowed up, Chunshi was like a fish in a net. She could only watch in despair as she was continuously dragged towards the white hole by the large net. F***CK. After some time, when Chunshi regained consciousness, he realized that he was in an unfamiliar vacuum environment. This vacuum environment was different from the dark space Chunshi had been in before. There were radiation, magnetic fields, rays, and various dust impurities that Chunshi was familiar with here. He calmed himself down and looked up. To his surprise, there was a gigantic planet beside him. Chunshi was shocked. He immediately flew out of the rubble and came to the star belt of this planet. Earthlings grew up looking at pictures of the 8 major planets in the solar system. Thus, Chunshi recognized it at a glance. This gigantic planet with a ring around it was none other than Saturn. Had he returned to the solar system? Thinking of this, Chunshi was suddenly excited. He quickly flew out of the star belt and went straight to the periphery of Saturn. A bright red star entered Chunshi's eyes: the sun. It really was the sun. The final trump card that the Taiching ancestor left for Heaven Capital was actually a teleportation array that led directly to the solar system. Chunshi looked back and saw that the 120,000 floating islands had all turned into ruins and were completely merged into Saturn's star belt. Yuhuan Tianzuan's aura was still there. Except for Taihua and the other 2 who were killed by Chunshi, the auras of the remaining 7 heavenly venerables were still there. They did not die because of the activation of the array. However, while the 10 heavenly venerables were fine, the residents of the great world were in trouble. Only those whose cultivation had reached the golden core stage and above could maintain their vitality in the universe and luckily escape this disaster. However, even in Heaven Capital, there were only a few people whose cultivation had reached the golden core stage and above. As for those unlucky people whose cultivation had not reached the golden core stage, right now they had already turned into ice-cold corpses one after another. There was no pain or wailing. Just like that, They died peacefully the moment the array was activated. There were at least tens of millions of them. Seeing this, even Qin Shi, who had long been accustomed to death, could not help but feel sad at this moment. After this battle, the vitality of the ancient cultivators was greatly damaged. It also almost shook the foundation of heaven capital that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Qin Shi originally only wanted to go to the great world to find the soul mirror and use it to get Ying back. Who would have thought that this trip would be so complicated? Perhaps the Taiqing ancestor had considered the instability of the great world from the beginning, so he deliberately left behind such an arrangement of cutting off the tail to survive and abandoning the rook to save the king. After all, Earth was their home and where their roots lay. Qin Shi's cultivation was the highest, so he woke up the fastest. Thus, he quietly floated in the void and began to seriously consider the next problem of how to deal with the aftermath. Right now, the core strength of heaven capital was gathered in the solar system. If he left it alone, even without the 10 heavenly venerables, the 5 divine generals would be enough to flatten the solar system. But if he wanted to eliminate them all in one fell swoop, wouldn't it be too cruel? How should he deal with it? This was really a complicated problem. Chapter 444. Qin Shi hadn't considered the issue of Tiandu's aftermath for too long. After all, he hadn't even settled his own family's affairs, so where would he find the time to care about other people's affairs? He had to find a way to retrieve Ying's soul. That was what Qin Shi needed to do right now. Thus, Qin Shi began a careful search of the ruins of Saturn's ring. Saturn's volume was 830 times that of Earth, and its rings were formed after comets and asteroids collided. Its width alone was 25 times that of Earth's diameter. Thus, when the 120,000 floating islands were thrown into Saturn's rings, it was like sand falling into the sea, not causing any waves at all. Perhaps because the formation had just been activated, the strange energy fluctuations on the soul mirror had completely disappeared. Qin Shi searched the floating island ruins for a long time, almost inch by inch, before finally finding that damnable mirror in one of the meteorite ruins. The sky-bearing mirror of floating dawn. The soul mirror was buried deep in the soil, so it was inevitable that it was stained with some dust and dirt. Qin Shi summoned it back with his inner energy, and a bone-chilling sensation came as soon as he touched it. In all honesty, the soul mirror really did appear to be a little mundane now that it had lost that unknown energy fluctuation. A dull mirror with a dark yellow frame. If it weren't for the exquisite patterns on the frame, and the mysterious power of the law faintly contained within, Qin Shi wouldn't have believed that this mirror was actually a legendary artifact. Connate peerless treasure. Perhaps this was what they meant by returning to one's natural state. The soul mirror wasn't an offensive treasure, so for Tiandu, its symbolic significance was far greater than its actual significance. When the sun-moon star formation was activated, Qin Shi didn't sense any spiritual fluctuations, so he deduced that the formation had nothing to do with the soul bridge. Whether it was the formation or the soul bridge, both were meant to travel to Earth, but the methods used were completely different. The sun-moon star formation was too barbaric and crude, and Xiannu's soul wasn't enough to activate it. Its true source of power was actually all the dragon veins in the great world. That was why when it was activated, it would set off a tidal wave of spiritual qi that was close to landslides and tsunamis. Qin Shi tried to infuse his true essence into the soul mirror, but there was no reaction. Thus, after a moment of hesitation, he separated a strand of his spirit from his heart aperture and carefully poured it into the soul mirror. Qin Shi was already cautious enough. After all, this was a connate cardinal treasure that he had never come into contact with before. But he didn't expect that the moment his spirit entered the mirror, it was as if Qin Shi's soul had been sucked away by the soul mirror, causing him to lose all sense of the outside world. His divine sense entered the soul mirror. It was only then that this connate supreme treasure truly displayed its uniqueness. There was a strange consciousness space within the soul mirror, which was also the place where Xiannu's soul was stored. As soon as Qin Shi's consciousness entered the soul mirror, he felt as if he'd fallen into the yellow springs or the river Styx. He was surrounded by dense resentment that refused to dissipate. Perhaps his arrival had disturbed the Een souls that had been imprisoned here for many years, so much so that the resentment of these Een souls was like bats in a bat cave, and they actually rushed towards him in groups. Chunshi couldn't help but snort angrily when he saw this. The spiritual pressure of a Dongshu cultivator immediately spread out. Arbiter Xiannu's cultivation wasn't high to begin with. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that she was an ordinary person, so how strong could her soul be? Een souls didn't have consciousness, but they still retained their instincts to seek good fortune and avoid calamity. Thus, when Chunshi released his aura, the Een souls scattered like frightened birds and beasts, not daring to approach him at all. One had to know that the soul mirror and the real world were two completely different concepts. The soul mirror was somewhat similar to a cultivator's sea of consciousness. In this space, the five senses were useless. They could only sense each other through their souls. And in Chunshi's perception, in this mysterious and strange soul mirror, there was a faint fluctuation of a soul that he was extremely familiar with. Although it was very weak, like a grain of gold in a vast sea of sand, Chunshi was still able to sense its existence immediately. This was the throbbing of the soul. It was also the bond between two people who truly loved each other. One look and they could see each other. One step was like a heavy city. Love was separated by mountains and seas. The mountains and seas couldn't be leveled. There were boats to cross the seas. There were roads to cross the mountains. This love overturned the mountains and seas. The mountains and seas could be leveled. Chunshi suddenly looked over. He felt as if there was someone waiting for him in the depths of his sea of consciousness. Thus he rushed forward without hesitation. Along the way, all the Een souls avoided him. Only the fluorescent light still floated silently in the same place. In the blink of an eye, Chunshi arrived at the position of the fluorescent light. "Ying, is it you? I'm here to pick you up." As he spoke, he tried to reach out to the fluorescent light. However, he completely forgot that he was in a space similar to the heart aperture. There was no way he could directly touch the other party. The fluorescent light couldn't give Chunshi any response. But from Chunshi's point of view, there was no need to say anything more. Ying was right in front of him. As long as he brought this fluorescent light back to Earth, Ying would naturally wake up. Their family could also be reunited. Thinking of this, Chunshi was suddenly very excited. Thus, he immediately used his powerful soul to gently envelop the fluorescent light. Then he tried to bring it out of this damned soul mirror. But at this time, Chunshi suddenly realized, this space seemed to only allow entry and not exit. There was no way out. However, after thinking about it for a while, he quickly felt relieved. After all, the spirit mirror was used to store Xianin souls. How could they escape so easily? If there was no exit, he could just open one himself. Speaking of which, it was strange. Ever since Chunshi's soul entered the spirit mirror, he completely lost his sense of his physical body. It was as if his physical body and soul were separated. Seeing this, Chunshi didn't panic at all. At this moment, he had already stepped into the paradise void stage, and had grasped the essence of the word void. It was just an ownerless object. So what if it was a Khanate cardinal treasure? Could it be that they could really trap him to death here? Thus, Chunshi immediately abandoned all distracting thoughts, and tried to establish a connection with his physical body. Perhaps it was his efforts that had worked. Not long after that, the physical body that he had left on the outskirts of Saturn sat down in mid-air with its legs crossed as if it were an electrified robot. At the same time, it began to inject its own energy into the soul mirror. The spirit mirror was not Chunshi's magic treasure, and it didn't have an instruction manual. Therefore, he could only rely on his experience to determine that activating the spirit mirror required a huge amount of true core. Chunshi originally planned to activate the spirit mirror to release the imprisoned Xianin souls. With him watching over the Xianin souls, no accidents would happen after the spirit mirror released the Xianin souls. However, Chunshi never thought that, as he continued to inject true core into the spirit mirror, an extremely powerful energy fluctuation suddenly erupted from the spirit mirror. Then, under the influence of this unknown energy, the huge Saturn began to rotate in the opposite direction along the planet's orbit. Chapter 445. The so-called revolution was the circular movement of the 8 planets around the Sun. Every time the Earth revolved around the Sun, it meant that another year had passed. The 8 planets of the solar system were born from the accretion disk of the same star, so they all revolved in the same direction, from west to east around the Sun. The length of each planet's orbit was different, so it naturally took them different amounts of time to complete one revolution. Using Earth's time as an example, Mercury took 68 days to complete one revolution, Saturn took 29 years to complete one revolution, and Pluto, which was the furthest from the Sun, took as long as 248 years to complete one revolution. It was precisely because of this that it was very difficult for the 8 planets to appear in the same straight line at the same time. Once it did, it would become a legendary phenomenon. 9 stars aligned. Ever since the birth of human civilization, there had never been a true 9 stars aligned. Although there was a 7 stars aligned on May 20, 2000, it was only a convergence of 7 stars. The more planets there were, the more difficult it was for them to converge in a straight line at the same time. This was a geometrical problem. Compared to the age of the planets, human civilization was still far too short. With a mere 6,000 years of civilization, humans hadn't even fully explored the solar system, so how could they dare to dream of exploring the vast universe? On this day, October 21st, it was supposed to be an ordinary day. However, under the influence of the soul mirror, Tian-Du unexpectedly descended into the solar system. Of course, this wasn't important. What was important was, after going through untold hardships, Chen-Shi finally obtained the soul mirror he yearned for day and night. Because of this, he also found Ying's long-lost soul. However, what he didn't expect was, in the instant that he activated the soul mirror and attempted to release the Yin spirits within, the soul mirror didn't activate as he had imagined. Instead, it suddenly erupted with an extremely powerful and unknown force. This force was so strong that it even pushed Saturn, which was revolving in its orbit, to rotate in the opposite direction. Chen-Shi sensed that something was amiss in the outside world. Just as he was feeling a little puzzled, an extremely powerful tremor also appeared within the soul mirror. It was like a bottle of water being violently shaken in someone's hand, and the thousands of Yin spirits within the bottle were instantly sent flying in all directions. Chen-Shi hastily protected Qin Ruoying's divine soul. However, immediately thereafter, his soul was instantly dragged out of the soul mirror by a burst of invisible power, as if it were a small boat caught in a whirlpool. After his soul returned to his body, Chen-Shi suddenly opened his eyes. He lowered his head and saw that the soul mirror was still in his hands. However, the previously dull surface of the mirror now faintly rippled with circles of ripples. Seeing this, Chen-Shi was shocked and quickly withdrew his true essence. He withdrew his true essence. But unfortunately, however, the soul mirror continued to operate. At this moment, Chen-Shi suddenly realized, in addition to Saturn, even Jupiter, Mars, Neptune, and Uranus began to rotate in the opposite direction under the influence of this unknown force. Among them, Venus and Mercury, which were closer to the Sun, suddenly accelerated their revolutions and converged with the Earth in a straight line. With the exception of Earth, the 8 planets all changed their respective orbital speeds and directions, converging into a straight line at a speed visible to the naked eye. In an instant, the alignment of 9 stars, a sudden phenomenon. After 10,000 years, this peerless formation set up by the Taiching divine ancestor was finally revealed to the world in its entirety. Even the great formation of sun, moon, and stars in the great world was actually only one of its subformations. The moment the alignment of 9 stars occurred, a large nomological net formed by the laws of heaven and earth vaguely appeared at the boundary of the solar system. This was something that had to be mentioned. The boundary of the solar system, which was the place where the sun's gravity could cover. There were as many as 100 billion comets there. These comets were gathered together by the sun's gravity, thus forming a spherical cloud, which was also known as the Oort cloud by scientists. If one were to look at it in another way, the Oort cloud could be seen as the atmosphere, and the comets within it could be seen as droplets of water vapor in the atmosphere. The moment the nomological net appeared, Chen-Shi was completely stunned. This large net was somewhat similar to the inescapable net in the great world, but it contained nomological attributes that Chen-Shi could not understand at all. One had to know that Chen-Shi had already stepped into the insightful void realm. However, when he saw this scene, he still felt a sense of loss and helplessness in his heart. It was like a primary school student trying to solve a calculus problem in university mathematics. The moment he saw those densely packed numbers and symbols, Chen-Shi was completely stunned. These were all left behind by the Taiching divine ancestor. The solar system was not like the great world. The area of 120,000 floating islands added together was at most equivalent to the area of Asia. But what about the solar system? Even if one flew at the speed of light, it would take an entire year to fly to the boundary of the solar system. And this was only the radius of the solar system. The more you know, the more you can recognize your own insignificance. To the current Chen-Shi, this sentence had become the supreme truth. At that moment, Chen-Shi even began to suspect, had he returned to Earth from heavenly spiral? Before he had reached the insightful void realm, he naturally could not see the nomological imprints at the boundary of the solar system. And it was precisely because he could not see these nomological imprints that he, who was only at the soul formation stage, could fly into the solar system without any hindrance and then return to Earth without any hindrance. Now that he thought about it, Chen-Shi's heart was suddenly filled with a creepy feeling. It was too terrifying. He did not even know how he came back. He had originally thought that he would be able to roam the universe freely after reaching the soul formation stage. Who would have thought? Even in the periphery of a mere solar system, there was such a shocking net of laws. If it were not for someone secretly opening the way for him, how could he, who was only at the soul formation stage, so easily pass through this net of nomological laws? Everyone would more or less suffer from paranoia. And Chen-Shi was no exception. He was afraid. Although he did not know the true use of this net of nomological laws, Chen-Shi could still sense the supreme power contained in it, as long as he used his heart to feel it. This was an absolute power that was above the insightful void stage, and even the Tao integration stage. Perhaps only true immortals who had experienced the great tribulation of heaven and earth could control it. With this in mind, Chen-Shi felt as if the soul mirror in his hand was a hot potato that he could not throw away even if he wanted to, and it was very hot in his hand. But if he continued to use the soul mirror, Chen-Shi would not dare to do so even if he had 100 guts. After all, Yingying's soul was still inside. Who knew how many secrets were hidden in this broken mirror? What if he caused some kind of trouble? What should he do then? Chen-Shi was stunned as he looked at the spectacular 9-star alignment in front of him. Chapter 446. With scruples in their hearts, they were no longer fearless. Most young people looked down on those mediocre middle-aged people. Little did they know that these middle-aged people were just like them back then. Fearless in life and fearless in death. Chen-Shi's fear did not originate from his heart, but from the outside world. This was because he had already become a middle-aged man from a young age. He had a lover, a child, and a family of his own. He was the sky of this family, the umbrella of this family, and the pillar of this family. So shouldn't he be afraid? If it was in the past, Chen-Shi would definitely continue to study the soul mirror. He would even try to erase the mark left behind by the grand pure divine ancestor, and turn it into his natal magic treasure. But now such thoughts did not appear in his mind at all. After all, Chen-Shi was already old. Back to the spectacular 9-star alignment, which could be called a space wonder. Under the push of the soul mirror, the 9 planets quickly converged into a straight line. From afar, it looked like a cannon was in place and ready to fire at any time. The 9-star alignment lasted for about 2 minutes. During these 2 minutes, Chen-Shi's mood was as tense as a string. He was afraid that the 9-star alignment would affect Earth, so he raised his essence, energy, and spirit to the highest point early on. If anything strange happened next, Chen-Shi would rush back to Earth immediately and take away Nian, Yingying, and everyone else he cared about. He might not be able to stop the 9-star alignment, but it would not be easy to hurt his family in front of him. Chen-Shi had already prepared for the worst, but he did not expect What happened next was completely different from what he had imagined. The 9-star alignment did not have any destructive impact on the solar system. The only thing that was affected was the large net of laws entrenched in the periphery of the solar system. He saw. The moment the 9 stars gathered, the large net that contained the unknown power of laws began to flicker faintly. If the 9-star alignment was a key, then the large net of laws was a door. All he needed to do was insert the key into the keyhole and twist it gently. This huge net of laws that had shrouded the solar system for over 10,000 years slowly loosened. The stars moved, and all living things were in the universe. The 9 stars returned to their positions, and the laws disappeared. After the invisible power from the soul mirror disappeared, the 8 planets and the degraded Pluto began to revolve in their original orbits. This rare spectacle of the 9 stars alignment was like an unreachable mirage. Apart from making Chen Shibai worry for a while, it didn't leave anything else behind. After a flash of white light, the soul mirror reverted back to its previous dull and lifeless state. At this moment, the large net of laws that made even Chen Shi's heart palpitate completely vanished. Chen Shi frowned as he looked at the distant Oat Nebula. That was the boundary of the solar system, and also the boundary between the solar system and the universe. He vaguely felt that he had accidentally triggered some sort of mechanism, so he could not help but want to go to the Oat Nebula to check it out. But after thinking about it, in the end, Chen Shi suppressed the throbbing in his heart and flew toward Saturn's ring with the soul mirror in hand. The people from Celestial Capital were still unconscious. Once they woke up, these people would inevitably yearn for their former home, which would bring a huge impact to Earth. Chen Shi did not want any external forces to interfere with the self-development of Earth's civilization. So he set up a large formation on Saturn's ring and imprisoned all the refugees from Celestial Capital in the formation. This was only a temporary measure. Ying had not woken up yet, and Nian was still waiting for him at home. So why would Chen Shi waste too much time dealing with the refugees from Celestial Capital? It would not be too late to come back and clean up the mess in Celestial Capital after he dealt with the problems at home. Therefore, after hurriedly setting up the formation, Chen Shi headed straight for Earth without looking back. Nian, I'm back. Chen Shi did not know that at the same time he set off to return to Earth. Outside the distant Oat Nebula, a wooden boat was rushing into the Oat Nebula at an extremely fast speed. The Oat Nebula was made up of trillions of comets. Compared to it, the small wooden boat suddenly looked extremely small, like a microorganism under a microscope. 2 teenagers of 15 or 16 years old sat on the boat. One of them sat at the bow, holding a magic weapon that looked like an oar in his hand. Every time the teenager waved the oar, the wooden boat would suddenly rush forward tens of thousands of miles in an extremely strange way. Chenghua, what are you doing? The teenager sitting at the stern was busy cultivating, so he did not pay attention to the direction the wooden boat was heading. At this moment, he looked up and found that the surroundings were full of comets of different sizes. He was so scared that his face turned pale. He quickly grabbed the corner of the teenager's clothes and shouted, "This is the Tianshu ruins. Do you want to die? Turn around. Turn around. I don't want to die here with you." Hearing this, the teenager called Chenghua seemed to have gone crazy. He did not care about his companion's dissuasion. Instead, he waved the oar in his hand wildly, so that the speed of the wooden boat instantly increased by 30%. Seeing this, the teenager sitting at the stern was not willing to wait for death. He immediately raised his hands and directly launched an attack at the teenager who was driving the boat. Chapter 447. Generosity should be rewarded, and arrogance should stop the youthful heart. According to Earth standards, Chenghua and Yifei were still underage. However, relying on their extraordinary cultivation base, these 2 brats, who were still wet behind the ears, were actually more courageous than most people. They didn't understand how they could enter the Tianshu ruins so easily. However, after confirming that it really happened, even the cautious Yifei didn't complain about going back. Instead, he became excited. The boat of friendship started moving again. The 2 youths squeezed at the front of the boat, and watched the cloud-piercing shuttle enter the solar system at an extremely fast speed. There was no fear of the unknown in their eyes, only a strong yearning for the ancient legends. Chonghua, it's better to be careful. Rumor has it that the Tianshu ruins are the cultivation grounds of the ancient Almighty. Although there may be great opportunities hidden inside, there are also hidden dangers. Our cultivation levels are still low. Without this cloud-piercing shuttle, we wouldn't even be able to roam the stars freely. If there's some kind of formation on this planet, we'll probably die here today. As he spoke, Ife pointed at Pluto, which was not far away. Pluto was only 1/3 the size of the moon. From afar, it didn't give off any sense of visual oppression. Dwarf planets like Pluto were extremely common in the universe. However, Pluto was inside the Tianshu ruins. Therefore, even though the two of them had roamed the stars since they were young, and were used to all kinds of dangers in the universe, they didn't dare to approach it at all. Therefore, the two of them drove the wooden boat around Pluto, and after making sure that there was nothing worth exploring, they quickly sailed to the next planet. In reality, the solar system was like an egg. The sun was the yolk, the space where the 8 planets were was the egg white, and the outermost Oat Nebula, which was covered with trillions of comets, was the eggshell. The dense comets floated around the solar system, so the situation inside the solar system couldn't be seen from the outside. And this was in the eyes of outsiders, Tianshu ruins. For the immortal cultivators in the outside world, the Tianshu ruins were like a dried-up treasure trove. According to ancient records, before the Tianshu ruins were sealed, it was once a holy land for cultivation. Even the glorious jade clear grotto heaven was once only one of the inheritances in the Tianshu ruins. Of course, the Tianshu ruins back then was not called the Tianshu ruins. Instead, it was called Tianshu realm. Later, for some reason, the Tianshu realm, which was at its peak, suddenly declined. Then an ancient almighty set up a heaven and earth formation, completely isolating this galaxy from the outside world. Under the protection of the formation, no one could approach the Oat Nebula. In the blink of an eye, tens of thousands of years had passed. Everything about the Tianshu ruins gradually faded from people's minds as time passed. It wasn't until a few years ago that a brilliant genius appeared in the jade clear grotto heaven that the Tianshu ruins returned to the public sight. This genius had cultivated for less than 1,000 years, but his cultivation had already stepped into the ranks of Empyrean. Because of this, he was known as the #1 cultivator below the supreme realm. He even had hopes of becoming the next supreme headmaster of the Jade Clear Grotto. But it was a pity, however. This young celestial lord was crazy for some unknown reason. He actually wanted to use the method of exploring the Tianshu ruins to make his name resound throughout the Supreme Palace enclosure. Yuan read. Yuan as in broken and ruined walls. Luoyang was known as the ancient capital of 13 dynasties, but after 2,000 years, it had become a third-tier city. The Tianshu ruins had been quiet for more than 2,000 years. Tens of thousands of years had passed. The immortal cultivators in the Supreme Palace enclosure had long forgotten its former glory. This Tianshu realm master wanted to use the Tianshu ruins as a stepping stone, but he never expected in front of the sun, moon, and stars formation. He was like a moth to a flame. He did not even cause a spark before he turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared from the world. This was also the reason why no one dared to approach the Oat Nebula. The young man did not know the immensity of heaven and earth. He was not afraid of the slightest thing. Thus, the two daring brats piloted the cloud-piercing shuttle and hurried in the direction of Earth. Back to Chenxi. After imprisoning the people of Tiandu in Saturn's ring, he rushed back to Earth. Shangjing City, which he had not seen in a long time. The courtyard, which he had not seen in a long time. It was late autumn. The old locust tree in the courtyard had already shed its leaves. The withered leaves were piled up on the bluestone floor. When the autumn wind blew, a few leaves drifted out of the courtyard. It was not the courtyard that was deserted, but the people's hearts. Chenxi did not like this feeling. Thus, he frowned and looked around the courtyard. After confirming that his restrictions were not damaged, he immediately waved his hand and used his supreme cultivation to forcefully reverse the flowering of the plants in the courtyard. In an instant, It was as if spring had returned to the earth. Hundreds of flowers bloomed. Even the old locust tree in the courtyard suddenly grew lush green leaves. Accompanied by the overflowing fragrance of the flowers, Chunxi strode toward the west wing. It was now 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Shangjing. Nianyan was not at home. Qin Yongyan and the big cat should be waiting for her at the school gate. Chapter 448. Chunxi hesitated for a long time before he finally came to a decision. He planted a gentle kiss on his lover's forehead before he sat down next to Qin Ruoying with his legs crossed. He was prepared to let his soul enter the spirit mirror again, and infuse his inner energy into it to activate it just like last time. This time, whether it was the explosion of the heavenly capital or the 9-star alignment, he had to bring Yingying's soul out. It was fine when she didn't go home, but when she got home and saw that her lover was still lying quietly in bed, Chunxi's heart suddenly felt very uncomfortable. He was very upset because he had failed to protect Qin Ruoying. After all, for a cultivator who had reached the Dongshu stage, what was the point of cultivating if he couldn't even protect the woman he loved? Even if I lived forever, I would be nothing more than a soulless zombie without you by my side. Therefore, Chunxi was like a tortoise eating a scalpel this time. He was determined to rescue Qin Ruoying's soul. Even though he knew that activating the spirit mirror might lead to some unexpected things, he was not willing to wait any longer. He had waited for a long time. Yingying had also waited for a long time. He couldn't live without his lover, and Nianyan couldn't live without her mother. This family couldn't live without a mistress. Therefore, after Chunxi made his decision, he immediately infused his inner energy into the spirit mirror without hesitation. When he gave it his all, his inner energy was as vast and mighty as the Yangtze River, or as endless as the surging Yellow River. As the incomparably dense inner energy flowed into the spirit mirror, a strange white light suddenly lit up on the surface of the spirit mirror. Seeing this, Chunxi immediately held his breath and entered the white light again using the method of astral projection. It was still the same strange space of consciousness. However, after Chunxi entered, he suddenly realized that there were many subtle changes in this place. There were even some colors. One had to know that the space of consciousness was like a universe that had yet to be developed. Consciousness was an inexplicable and inexplicable thing. There was no concept of dimensions here, so the 5 senses were naturally useless. Everything could only be felt by the heart. As a result, everything he saw, heard, and even touched here. In fact, it was just a manifestation of one's inner consciousness. Therefore, theoretically speaking, there would not be any changes in the space of consciousness, because it did not have a proper form to begin with. But the strange thing was, this time, however, Chunxi's feelings were completely different from last time. In his perception, this originally chaotic space of consciousness seemed to have been split open by Panga's giant axe at this moment. There was a sky here, and suddenly there was a land. There was a dim yellow aurora in the sky and a dark green Styx river on the ground. Chunxi was now standing in the middle of the river Styx. The river was not deep, barely reaching his knees. Chunxi was a little surprised by the changes here. After carefully sensing for a while, he suddenly realized that the souls that had previously filled the entire space of consciousness had now all turned into fish in the river Styx, and were constantly rushing forward with the river Styx. Seeing this, Chunxi could not help but frown as he walked forward along the river Styx. He did not know how long he had walked. Only then did he finally find that familiar fluctuation of divine soul again. It was still that weak fluorescent light. Yingying's soul was there. Chunxi immediately ran toward the fluorescent light. However, as he got closer and closer to the fluorescent light, Chunxi's mood became more and more serious, because he suddenly realized the fluorescent light was at the end of the river Styx. Thousands of souls were following the river Styx and pouring into the fluorescent light. After realizing that something was wrong, Chunxi's heart could not help but skip a beat. He thought that something had happened here. Therefore, he did not even have time to think. He immediately used his soul to wrap around the fluorescent light and tried to bring it out of the soul mirror. However, the strange thing was, This fluorescent light seemed to have taken root in the space of consciousness. No matter how Chunxi tried, the fluorescent light floated there quietly and did not move at all. After all, Chunxi was now an immortal cultivator at the Dongshu stage. Even if he had left his physical body, his soul should still be extremely powerful. However, no matter how hard he tried, the fluorescent light did not move at all. After a few fruitless attempts, Chunxi was instantly enraged. After hearing a wild roar, an extremely strong golden light suddenly erupted from his body. Then, this golden light was like the sun rising from the east, instantly illuminating half of the space of consciousness and completely enveloping the fluorescent light. At the same time, Chunxi's reckless behavior seemed to have affected the river Styx below. As a result, the river Styx suddenly dried up. Countless souls were like startled birds, instantly turning into soul bodies and flying out in all directions. The chaos had not even split, but it was already so severely injured. How powerful was Chunxi's soul? What had entered the soul mirror before was only a wisp of it. But now, Chunxi wanted to completely separate his soul from his physical body and pour it all into the soul mirror. He wanted to use his soul to build a soul bridge that connected Qin Ruoying to the outside world, and use it to forcibly bring her out of the soul mirror. Fortunately, the soul mirror was now an ownerless object. From the moment Qin Ruoying woke up to the moment she captured Chunxi, the entire process seemed to have happened in the blink of an eye. At this moment, Chunxi could roughly guess the reason. Normal people might think that this was amnesia, but in reality, this was a sign of a missing soul. It was probably because he forcibly took her soul out of the spirit mirror, so the soul he took out was incomplete, and Qin Ruoying lost her memories. After figuring out the crux of the matter, Chunxi's originally tense mood immediately relaxed. It wasn't a big problem, it was just that her soul was missing. At worst, he could go to the spirit mirror later, and the problem would be solved. However, Qin Ruoying's attitude towards him made Chunxi, who was used to Yingying's gentleness and consideration, suddenly feel like he was enjoying himself. In this world, other than Yingying, which woman could ride on his back? Nianyan was still young, so she couldn't be considered a woman. Qin Ruoying rode on Chunxi's back, and her two legs were straddling Chunxi's waist. Therefore, the roots of her thighs were tightly pressed against Chunxi's waist, and he was firmly sandwiched between them. Although she used a lot of strength, this strength was not even enough to tickle Chunxi. Therefore, Chunxi was not in a hurry to struggle. Instead, he lay on the bed and silently felt the softness coming from Yingying's thighs. TSK, this feeling, it was really bouncy, full, and alluring. He was used to eating a lady from a noble family who was as gentle as water. Suddenly, she was replaced with an ice beauty who was as cold as ice. The taste was simply wonderful. If Qin Ruoying knew what he was thinking, she would probably raise her hand and slap him across the face. Men are all pigs. Chunxi was like a dead fish, lying on the bed and not moving at all. At this moment, Qin Ruoying seemed to have realized that her posture was a little indecent, so she immediately jumped up from his body and went straight to the door of the west wing. Chunxi was busy savoring the feeling, and when Qin Ruoying left, it instantly made him feel a sense of emptiness, so he hurriedly got up and chased after her. Yingying, don't run around, where are you going? Seeing that Chunxi was chasing after her, Qin Ruoying turned her head and glared fiercely at him. Chunxi had no choice but to hurriedly take a few steps back, and then put on an old face, indicating that he would not go near her. After that, Qin Ruoying then turned and walked out of the west wing. When she walked out of the house and saw the beautiful scenery of hundreds of flowers in full bloom, Qin Ruoying could not help but smile. Yingying had always liked flowers and trees, so the courtyard had long been filled with potted plants by Chunxi. When Chunxi returned home, he had conveniently changed the flowering period of the plants in the courtyard, but he did not expect that it would come in handy at this moment. At this time, the little fellow didn't forget to add, "Dad, you play by yourself. Mom said you're not allowed to enter the room. I'll sleep with Mom today." Chunshi had no choice but to turn around and walk into the guest room that Xiao Yuan stayed in before. As early as when Chunshi left, Xiao Yuan had already successfully entered a multinational company as an intern under Gu Lao's introduction. So the tea house was completely closed. Chunshi lay on the bed, thinking about how to reopen the tea house tomorrow while listening to the movements in the room next door. Although Qin Ruoying lost her memory, she still had a kind of heartfelt care for Nian. This also made Chunshi feel very gratified. Ying was still the same Ying. Although incomplete, she was still the Ying that he couldn't help but be fascinated by. Qin Ruoying seemed to have forgotten how to cultivate, so when the little fellow fell asleep, she silently lay on the side. Chunshi was on this side of the wall, she was on the other side of the wall. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 452. It was night. It was a dark and windy night. Without alerting anyone, Chunshi quietly slipped into the east wing from the guest room. After returning home this time, he actually had a lot of urgent matters to deal with. The first in line was Qin Ruoying, then the second in line was, naturally, it was his sister-in-law. Qin Xueqing was lying quietly in the east wing. The furnishings in the room were almost exactly the same as 2 years ago. Under the protection of Chunxi's restriction, not to mention thieves, even Wang Chuanju could only look at her daughter through the window. Although Qin Xueqing had a bad temper, her heart was still quite soft. She definitely belonged to the type that was tough on the outside but soft on the inside. Therefore, sometimes even Chunshi would suddenly feel that his sister-in-law was quite cute. Therefore, even without Qin Yongyan saying anything, Chunshi had already decided that he must wake his sister-in-law up tonight. As a result, as the brother-in-law, tonight, under the eyes of his wife, he sneaked into his sister-in-law's room. After all, Ying was his lover, so Chunshi didn't need any medium at all. He could directly find Qin Ruoying's soul among the thousands of souls. His sister-in-law didn't have this kind of spiritual bond with him, so Chunshi needed some kind of medium to find her soul. This medium was naturally Qin Xueqing's physical body. Qin Xueqing was still wearing the white training clothes that she wore before she fainted. After Chunshi pushed open the door and entered, the first thing that came into his sight were the 2 towering mountains. His wife was in the opposite room, but as the brother-in-law, he sneaked into his sister-in-law's room in the middle of the night. Although he did it to do a good deed, this kind of feeling was somewhat strange. Moreover, with Chunxi's cultivation, what difference did it make if his sister-in-law wore clothes in front of him? Of course, Chunshi was not a lecherous and wretched person, so he immediately withdrew his divine sense, then closed his eyes and came to Qin Xueqing's side. Chunshi sat down beside his sister-in-law with his legs crossed, and placed the soul mirror flat on her forehead before sending his consciousness into it again. As the saying goes, unfamiliar the first time, familiar the second. With the previous 2 experiences under his belt, Chunshi was already very familiar with the process of entering the soul mirror again. It was still that space of consciousness. But this time, however, the space of consciousness that Chunshi saw was different from the last time. Instead, it was like before the chaos was formed. The dim aurora and the green nether river were gone. All that was left were thousands of unconscious souls drifting about in the chaos. After Chunshi arrived, the thousands of Yin souls immediately fled in all directions, as if they were avoiding the god of plague. Chapter 454. Qin Ruoying's subconscious affectionate actions were naturally seen by Chunshi. Therefore, Chunshi immediately put on a calm and collected expression, as if to imply that he did not see anything. There were many types of amnesia. The most common situation was not being able to recognize one's loved ones. However, they could still speak, write, draw, and have the ability to take care of themselves in daily life. Therefore, amnesia did not mean that one had lost their intelligence. And it was precisely because Qin Ruoying had lost her memory that everything was so new and strange to her. She was very clear about the meaning of the word mother. But she did not dislike the little fellow calling her mother left and right. Every time she heard the little fellow call her mother, she instinctively wanted to respond. If it was not for the special reserved nature of women stopping her, Qin Ruoying would have already held the little fellow in her arms and caressed him. Of course, Qin Ruoying could accept the little fellow, but it did not mean that she could accept Chen Shi. Women always had to be a little guarded against men. The kind of woman who would completely fall into a man's good intentions could only play the role of a victim in a relationship. The one who cannot get is in an uproar. The one who is favored is fearless. No matter where it was, this sentence was absolutely regarded as the supreme truth. Therefore, even though Chen Shi had already stepped into the insightful emptiness realm, he was still deeply immersed in it, and even somewhat enjoyed it. The capital-affiliated primary school was not far from Hohai, about 7 or 8 stops away. After the family of 3 got off the car, the little fellow, like other children, held his father in one hand and his mother in the other, and skipped towards the school gate. Although the school was chosen by Chen Shi, this was the first time he came, so he could not help but use his divine sense to carefully scan the school. And overall, it was not bad. At least he did not find any filth hidden under the sanctimonious surface. The management of a primary school was not as loose as a kindergarten. So Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying could not even enter the school gate, and could only stand at the school gate and say goodbye to the little fellow. Dad, goodbye. Mom, goodbye. I will listen to teacher obediently. Remember to pick me up after school. Perhaps it was because Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying were sending Nian Nian to school for the first time. And because the couple was too good-looking, even the guards at the entrance couldn't help but take a few more glances at them. Nian Nian was the most popular person in the class. Therefore, after many parents sent their children to school, they could not help but stand at the side and whisper to each other. Is that child the one who dared to hit someone on the first day of reporting? Yes, he's in the same class as our Yang Yang.